It began upon a vast glittering sea, a silent arena stretching between the blue of the Pacific sky and the endless horizon of war. It was May 1942, and the ocean south of the Solomon Islands lay calm beneath the sun, its waters smooth, its air heavy with tension. To the east sailed the United States Navy, still reeling from the shock of Pearl Harbor, but rising with new resolve. To the west moved the Imperial Japanese Navy, victorious, unstoppable, sweeping across the Pacific like a tide of fire. Neither side could see the other. Neither side would fire a single shot in direct sight of their enemy. And yet, within days, the Coral Sea would erupt into the world's first great carrier versus carrier battle, a duel fought entirely by aircraft, where fleets struck and bled without ever laying eyes on each other. This is the entire history of the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first carrier duel in history, where the age of naval warfare changed forever. The months leading up to the battle had reshaped the Pacific. Japan's empire, once confined to its islands, had exploded outward in a storm of conquest. In just 5 months after Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces had captured Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies. The rising sun now stretched from Burma to the Central Pacific, its fleets dominating half the world's oceans. The United States, stunned by the devastation of December 7th, scrambled to recover. But beneath the shock, strategy began to form. American codebreakers at Station Hypo in Hawaii had begun intercepting and deciphering Japanese communications. From those signals came a revelation. Japan was planning a new offensive aimed at seizing Port Moresby in New Guinea. If successful, the capture of Port Moresby would threaten Australia itself, cutting off Allied supply routes and placing the entire South Pacific under Japanese control. The Allies could not let that happen. Thus began the race to the Coral Sea. The Japanese assembled a powerful invasion force, Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue commanding, with carrier support from Admiral Takeo Takagi's task force, which included the carriers Shukaku and Zuikaku, veterans of Pearl Harbor and the Indian Ocean raids. Their plan was simple and audacious: seize Tulagi, establish air bases, and then capture Port Moresby. Opposing them was Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, commanding the American carriers USS Lexington and USS Yorktown, along with Australian and American cruisers and destroyers. It was a contest of skill and nerve, two forces of immense power, moving toward each other across a sea too vast for the eye, guided only by aircraft and radio reports. The stage was set for a battle that would redefine everything the world knew about naval war. On May 4th, the Japanese struck first, invading Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. But the very next day, aircraft from the Yorktown appeared over the horizon, surprising the Japanese anchorage. Dive bombers swooped through flak and smoke, sinking several enemy ships. It was a small victory, but it gave Fletcher valuable intelligence. The Japanese now knew the Americans were nearby, and the hunt began. For the next 2 days, both fleets maneuvered through the Coral Sea, searching, probing, each trying to find the other first. Reconnaissance aircraft fanned out across hundreds of miles, scanning the waves for shadows and wakes. The ocean was vast, but destiny was closing in. On May 7th, the duel began in earnest. Both sides struck almost simultaneously, but against the wrong targets. American pilots, believing they had found the main Japanese carriers, instead attacked the smaller carrier Shōhō, covering the invasion force. In a matter of minutes, she was overwhelmed. Hit by at least 13 bombs and torpedoes, flames engulfed her deck, her planes burned, and she sank beneath the sea. A jubilant American pilot radioed back to his carrier the words that would echo through history: scratch One Flattop. But while the Americans celebrated, the Japanese struck back. Their aircraft found and attacked the oiler Shōhō and destroyer Sims, sinking both, a bitter price for mistaken identity. Still, the real clash was yet to come. The morning of May 8th, 1942 dawned over a calm sea and an uneasy silence. The fleets had found each other. Hundreds of miles apart, aircraft began to launch from both sides almost simultaneously, waves of dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters roaring into the sky. They passed one another in the air, unseen, heading toward their targets. For the first time in history, two naval fleets would fight a full-scale battle without direct contact, their fates decided by the courage of men in cockpits. At around 11 in the morning, the American strike group reached the Japanese carriers. The Shikaku was hit repeatedly. 3 bombs tore through her flight deck, detonating deep inside her hull. Her decks were torn open, her hangars burning, her flight operations crippled. Nearby, Sukaku, hidden under a shroud of rain squalls, escaped major damage but lost dozens of her planes in combat. As the Japanese scrambled to save their ships, their own bombers descended on the Americans. The Lexington and Yorktown were under attack. The sky filled with tracer fire and smoke as bombs and torpedoes crashed into the waves. The Yorktown was hit but survived. The Lexington was not so lucky. 2 torpedoes and several bombs ripped through her hull. She fought the fires for hours, her crew working desperately to save her, but the damage was too great. At 4 in the afternoon, secondary explosions erupted below decks, sealing her fate. Her crew abandoned ship, tears in their eyes as their proud carrier, Lady Lex, slipped beneath the Pacific waves in a final blaze of glory. When the smoke cleared, both sides had suffered. The Japanese had lost 1 carrier and hundreds of aircraft. The Americans had lost 1 carrier and damaged another. But strategically, the balance had shifted. Japan's invasion force, stripped of air cover, was forced to withdraw. The advance toward Port Moresby and the threat to Australia was over. For the first time in the war, a major Japanese offensive had been stopped. The cost was high, but the message was clear: the tide could be turned. The Battle of the Coral Sea was unlike anything that had come before. It marked the dawn of a new kind of warfare, where the sea itself was no longer the arena, but the sky above it. It was the first time in history that fleets had fought beyond the horizon, their fate determined not by the range of their guns, but by the reach of their aircraft. It was the beginning of the carrier age, the end of the battleship's dominance, and the prelude to the great showdowns yet to come, Midway, Late Gulf, and beyond. For the sailors who fought there, Coral Sea was a crucible of courage. They faced the unknown, an enemy they could not see, an ocean filled with fire. They watched friends vanish into the waves, ships burn until only their names remained, and skies so full of smoke that day became night. Yet they fought on, not for glory, but for survival, for the belief that in those waters the future of the Pacific would be decided. Today the Coral Sea lies quiet once more. The wreck of the Lexington rests deep beneath the waves, her guns still pointing outward, her decks now home to coral and fish. The ocean that was once a battlefield is calm again, but the echoes remain, the hum of engines, the cries of pilots, the thunder of bombs. The battle may have been fought far from shore, but its ripples changed the world. The Battle of the Coral Sea was the first step in a long road, a road that would lead to Midway, to the turning of the Pacific, and ultimately to victory. It was a battle born of desperation and ended in transformation, a moment when the world first glimpsed the future of naval war. Tonight we return to that vast expanse of blue, to the decks where sailors watched the horizon with steady hearts, to the cockpits where pilots flew into fire, and to the waters where history itself was rewritten. This is the entire history of the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first carrier duel in history, the battle that changed the nature of war at sea forever, and the moment when courage rose from the depths of despair. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? Are you drifting off under the calm of your own night sky, or listening from afar, imagining the roar of engines over the endless Pacific? Wherever you are, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me know. I'd love to hear where in time and place you're joining us from tonight. December 7, 1941, Oahu, Territory of Hawaii, at 07:55 hours local time. The first wave of 183 aircraft from Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's Kido Butai plunged from a cloud deck over Pearl Harbor. Armor-piercing bombs weighing 800 kilograms struck the USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma within minutes, igniting a column of fire taller than Ford Island's cranes. By 1000 hours, 8 battleships lay shattered or burning, and the Pacific Fleet's surface arm was effectively erased in less than 2 hours. In Tokyo, staff officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy's First Air Fleet compiled after-action reports, noting success of complete surprise, their phrasing cold and precise. That morning proved the aircraft carrier, not the battleship, now ruled the sea. The speed, reach, and lethality of naval air power rendered centuries of gunnery doctrine obsolete. On December 8th, newspapers in Washington and New York carried photographs of upturned hulls captioned simply, "A new kind of war." For both empires, the lesson was unmistakable. The ocean had become an airfield. January 1942, Combined Fleet Headquarters, Tokyo Bay. Admiral Esaroku Yamamoto reviewed expansion charts, stretching from the Marshall Islands to the approaches of Australia, red arrows converging on Port Moresby and Tulagi. Operation Mo, the planned seizure of southeastern New Guinea, was logged in Combined Fleet Operational Order No. 1. The objective was strategic isolation to sever Allied lines between the United States and Australia. Imperial Navy planners estimated a success probability of 80% if carrier support could neutralize Allied air forces in the Coral Sea. The centerpiece would be the Shokaku and Zuikaku, twin carriers of 25,000 tons each, carrying 72 aircraft apiece. Their top speed of 34 knots and flight deck length of 257 meters embodied Japan's mastery of naval aviation. To the imperial staff, these ships were instruments of national destiny. Yet beneath their precision lay an overconfidence born of unbroken victories from the Philippines to Rabaul. The Coral Sea would test that certainty against a foe learning faster than anticipated. Across the Pacific, in the grey hallways of the Navy Department in Washington, Rear Admiral Ernest J. King studied intercepted Japanese communiques decoded under Project Magic. Fragments referenced MO and AF, terms whose meaning analysts debated fiercely. Commander Joseph Rochefort at Station H. Ball in Pearl Harbor proposed that AF denoted Midway, while MO targeted Port Moresby. The decrypted signals, though incomplete, revealed an operation timed for early May. The Americans had only 2 operational carriers in the region, USS Lexington CV-2 and USS Yorktown CV-5, both under Task Forces 11 and 17. These were aging ships by design year, each displacing 36,000 tons and fielding 70 aircraft, yet they represented the entire striking power of the Pacific Fleet. In comparison, Japan had at least 6 frontline carriers in active rotation. Washington's planners realized their only chance lay not in numbers, but in anticipation. Intelligence, not armor, would have to win the first round. By February, the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Intelligence compiled Strategic Estimate No. 7, a 24-page assessment predicting Japan's next thrust, southward toward Australia's northern approaches. Maps pinned across the wall traced shipping lanes from San Francisco through Noumea to Port Moresby, a supply route covering more than 7,000 nautical miles. Analysts calculated that if Japan occupied Port Moresby, Allied convoys would require detours of nearly 2,000 miles eastward, crippling reinforcement timetables. The report concluded bluntly, "If Moresby falls, Australia may be isolated by May." Admiral Chester Nimitz, newly appointed Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Fleet, underlined that sentence twice in blue pencil. He ordered Task Force 17, under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, to prepare for offensive reconnaissance in the Coral Sea. In that phrasing lay the subtle shift of American doctrine, defense through preemption. The first duel of carriers was already being scripted by intelligence and geography. In Tokyo's Naval General Staff building on Kyoko Street, planners refined their own mathematics. The Shōhō, a converted light carrier of 11,000 tons, would support the MO invasion convoy. With a complement of 30 aircraft, half fighters, half bombers, she would guard landing operations near Tulagi, while Shonkaku and Suikaku prowled ahead as the strike force. Vice Admiral Takeo Takegi's 8th Fleet, including heavy cruisers Maiko and Haguro, provided gunfire support. On paper, the force balance favored Japan nearly 2-to-1 in tonnage and 3-to-2 in aircraft. Yet Japanese fuel reserves were stretched thin, and logistical calculations assumed weather cooperation across thousands of miles. The plan's precision concealed fragility. A single misidentified contact could send the entire operation adrift. The sea, as history would soon prove, had its own plans. In contrast, American preparations bore the stamp of improvisation. The USS Lexington carried F-4F Wildcat fighters with range limitations of less than 300 miles, barely half that of Japan's S-6M0s. To extend reach, the U.S. relied on long-range PBY Catalina patrol planes operating from Noumea and Espiritu Santo. Fleet communications still used cumbersome HF radio bursts, while Japanese units employed superior encrypted shortwave channels. The contrast was stark. Japan's efficiency against America's flexibility. Lieutenant Commander Robert E. Dixon, commander of Lexington's Air Group, later wrote in his log, "We compensate with will, not wiring." That spirit of adaptation, unpolished but relentless, would become the American fleet's defining advantage. The Coral Sea would be its first trial by invisibility. Technically, both navies entered the campaign blind to what a carrier duel truly meant. No surface guns, no line of sight, no visual horizon, only scouts, radios, and chants. Carriers were floating cities, each with thousands of men, hundreds of engines, and miles of wiring. Every launch cycle consumed 12 tons of aviation fuel and dozens of bombs hoisted by hydraulic lifts below deck. Coordination demanded near-perfect timing between pilots, deck crews, and operations officers. In that complexity lay both power and peril. One mistake in identification, one signal delayed by static, could determine the fate of nations. The Coral Sea would soon prove that technology and human nerve were now indistinguishable. By late April 1942, as the monsoon season shifted north, both empires' fleets moved silently toward convergence. Japanese charts marked the Coral Sea as Kaigun Tokubetsu Chiki, Navy Special Zone, while American submarines shadowed convoys through narrow island chains. Neither side knew the other's exact position, yet both believed they were the hunter. From Tokyo's perspective, Operation MO promised another effortless victory. From Washington's view, it was the first chance to halt Japan's tide. Between them stretched 2 million square miles of ocean, soon to become a proving ground for the weapon that would define modern war. The question hung over every plotting table and every encrypted transmission: how do you fight an enemy you cannot see? The answer would be written, in fire and silence, upon the waters of the Coral Sea. March 1942. Pearl Harbor, Oahu. Inside a nondescript basement beneath the 11th Naval District's communications building, fluorescent lamps hummed above tables littered with cipher pads and half-burned cigarette ends. Rochefort, head of Station Hypo, leaned over a page of intercepted Japanese naval traffic dated March 5th, its cryptic blocks of 5-digit groups stamped with the header JN25B. Around him, a dozen cryptanalysts tapped on Underwood typewriters, transcribing fragments of messages captured by field stations from Guam to Dutch Harbor. They worked without windows, under orders so secret that even Admiral Chester W. Nimitz upstairs could not visit unannounced. The message fragments, only 2% of them readable, hinted at something vast, a coming operation named M.O. Rochefort marked the letters in pencil, underlined twice, and quietly murmured, "If we can find M.O., we can see their next move." Outside, the scent of oil and salt drifted through open vents, a reminder that the Pacific War was now fought with invisible weapons. In that basement, the first move of the Battle of the Coral Sea began, not with shells or torpedoes, but with mathematics and patience. JN25 was not a single code, but a layered encryption system of 20,000 possible 5-digit groups, each standing for a word, phrase, or number. Every 9 days, Tokyo distributed a new additive table, a secret key to its fleet, making decryption exponentially harder. High-PO's staff, using IBM punch card machines and hand-built frequency charts, had broken roughly 10% of the vocabulary by March 1942. To outsiders, that progress looked small. To Rochefort, it was a crack in an armored vault. A single fragment, AF will be attacked early May, surfaced repeatedly across intercepts from Truk, Rabaul, and Palau. AF, the analyst reasoned, was a geographic code. The task became proving where, to confirm, Rochefort ordered a deception, send an unencrypted report that Midway Island's water plant was broken. When Tokyo radioed that AF is short of water, the Codebreakers knew they had drawn blood. Their silence erupted into applause. The enemy's veil had slipped. Where Japan relied on encryption, America relied on pattern. Japanese naval doctrine assumed that complex codes were unbreakable, rooted in centuries of bureaucratic precision, and a cultural confidence in procedure. In contrast, Station Hippiru thrived on improvisation and statistical intuition, an analytical jazz born of scarcity. The Imperial Navy's code clerks used meticulous additive tables, changed on fixed intervals. Rochefort's team used probability charts written on butcher paper taped to the walls. One side trusted systems, the other trusted minds. Japan's overconfidence in mathematical perfection blinded it to the creative chaos of its enemy's process. And in that contrast lay the seed of an intelligence revolution that would shape every naval battle to follow. For the first time, the United States Navy was no longer merely reacting to Japanese moves. It was anticipating them. The war had turned invisible, and whoever understood the silence would command the sea. By mid-April 1942, Hypo's decrypts reached a level of detail previously unthinkable. Message serial number 2, 6691, marked strictly secret. Commander-in-Chief Combined Fleet, listed vessel assignments: the light carrier Shōhō, the fleet carriers Shōkaku and Suikaku, and escorts from the 8th Fleet under Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi. From those fragments, Rochefort reconstructed Operation MO's intent to capture Tulagi and Port Moresby, severing the US-Australia supply line. The analyst's reconstruction occupied a 54-inch plotting board showing radio call signs, estimated speeds, and departure dates. Each variable was calculated from signal strength measurements. An average of 70 decibels received at Oahu's antenna arrays meant a distance of roughly 2,000 nautical miles. The accuracy was astonishing. Nimitz, reviewing the decrypts aboard USS Enterprise on April 25th, remarked, "This is the first time we fight with our eyes half open." Hypo had transformed fragments into foresight, yet even with data in hand, one question haunted them: what if they were wrong? In Washington, skepticism reigned. Admiral Ernest J. King, at the Office of Naval Operations, demanded multiple confirmations before approving a carrier deployment based on code breaking alone. Intelligence officers feared a repeat of Pearl Harbor's failure, acting too late or on bad assumptions. To convince them, Rochefort sent a 37-page report titled Summary of MO Intercepts, listing call signs, grid coordinates, and correlation tables comparing message volume with ship movement. Its tone was restrained, but between the lines was quiet certainty. If correct, Japan would strike south on May 3rd. If wrong, 2 US carriers, Yorktown and Lexington, would steam into an ambush. The risk was enormous: over 150 aircraft, 3,000 men, and the Pacific Strategic Initiative. Yet Nimitz made his decision in a single sentence: Hypo has earned the right to be believed. The die was cast in code. Across the Pacific in Tokyo, the tone was very different. The Naval General Staff, led by Admiral Asami Nagano, believed JN-25 to be mathematically unassailable. No Japanese officer imagined that American cryptanalysts, dismissed as barbarian amateurs, could pierce its structure. Field reports from the 11th Air Fleet even mocked the idea, claiming no foreigner could grasp the logic of Kana substitution. As a result, operational messages grew sloppier. Weather updates, fuel requests, and even sailing schedules were broadcast in the clear alongside encrypted text. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Navy's Communication Intelligence Organization estimated that such carelessness increased interception rates by 30%. Japan's technical superiority in machinery, faster carriers, better torpedoes, was being undermined by overconfidence in their own secrecy. For a fleet built on perfection, this unseen flaw would soon prove catastrophic. In Hypo's basement, exhaustion blurred into ritual. Operators worked 18-hour shifts, surviving on coffee, cigarettes, and the faint air conditioning from ceiling vents. When messages stalled, they played chess with cipher pads as boards, the pawns labeled with Japanese kana syllables. Each correct decryption meant fewer American deaths, and that knowledge weighed heavier than any bomb. Rochefort, ever superstitious, wore the same red smoking jacket throughout the operation, refusing to have it cleaned until MO was resolved. When confirmation arrived that Lexington and Yorktown had departed Pearl Harbor under radio silence, he said only, "We've done our part. The ocean decides the rest." Outside, the island hummed with aircraft engines preparing for another unknown tomorrow. War, once visible in steel and flame, had become a contest of unseen minds. By early May 1942, The Codebreakers' whispers had turned into movement across the Pacific. 2 U.S. carrier task forces, guided by invisible threads of intelligence, converged toward the Coral Sea. On their charts, Rochefort's men marked the enemy's last known grid with red ink and dated it May 3rd, the day Shōhō would enter history. From this point forward, battle planning would never again rely solely on sight or scouts. It would depend on what could be heard and understood long before it was seen. The war had crossed a threshold, the age of information had begun. But even with knowledge on their side, the Americans faced an enemy still vastly superior in training, coordination, and striking power. The next chapter would reveal whether foresight could outfight experience. The silence had spoken. Now the sea would answer. April 21st, 1942. Truk Lagoon, Caroline Islands. Beneath a blazing equatorial sun, mechanics in stained khaki overalls wheeled a Mitsubishi, a 6M2 Model 21-0, tailcode EII-102, toward the aft elevator of the carrier Shōhō, its wings folded with an audible click, fitting into the tight choreography that defined the Imperial Navy's carrier air groups. On the flight deck, Lieutenant Commander Takahashi Kakuichi, leader of the dive bomber squadron, watched his men run drills with metronomic precision, engine warm-up times, arming checks and takeoff intervals timed to the second. Every action followed the kata, the codified rhythm of the Kido Butai, Japan's mobile strike force doctrine, perfected over a decade of peacetime training. Below deck, pilots studied aerial recognition charts of Port Moresby and Tulagi, targets in the upcoming Operation MO. Flight surgeon, Lieutenant Koga Shunzo, recorded blood pressure readings for each aviator, ensuring no one exceeded 130 millimeters of mercury before launch, a ritual of discipline masked as medicine. The carrier's loudspeakers blared the Kimigayo, blending nationalism and professionalism into one identity. To these men, flight was not improvisation, it was ceremony. Each Japanese fleet carrier, like Shukaku, carried 72 aircraft, divided into 3 squadrons, 18 Mitsubishi A6M0s for air defense, 27 IGD, 3 A1 Val dive bombers, and 27 Nakajima B, 5 N2 Kate torpedo bombers. Each squadron was led by a senior lieutenant with years of fleet experience, and each pilot logged over 800 flying hours, on average nearly double that of his American counterpart. Maintenance crews could prepare a fully armed Kate for launch in 13 minutes, its Type 91 torpedo inspected for warhead arming pressure and propeller spin calibration. Doctrine demanded total synchronization, deck handlers, ordnance teams, and signal officers moving as a single organism. The system's efficiency bordered on obsession, launch intervals of precisely 20 seconds, recovery rotations fixed at 4 hours. Perfection was measurable, repeatable, and absolute. Yet hidden within that perfection was its own constraint. Every deviation, every delay carried the weight of failure. Japan's aviation philosophy, codified in the Kido Butai Tactical Manual of 1938, viewed war as a performance of harmony. By contrast, American carriers like Lexington and Yorktown emphasized flexibility. Pilots could swap roles, improvising formation changes mid-mission. The Japanese approach drew from samurai tradition, discipline before adaptation. Pre-mission briefings lasted 3 hours, debriefings lasted 1. Commanders expected pilots to replicate doctrine precisely, even under chaotic conditions. American aviators later recalled that the Japanese came in perfect lines, perfect angles, until they had to react. On paper, such structure guaranteed efficiency. In combat, it meant hesitation in the face of the unexpected. rigidity disguised as reliability. The same system that had conquered the Pacific in 6 months was about to face its first opponent who refused to play by the script. Flight tests over Truk's inner lagoon reflected this exacting standard. Pilots practiced low-level torpedo runs at 100 meters altitude, maintaining formation spacing of 75 meters. Errors greater than 10 meters earned written reprimands. Dive bombers descended from 12,000 feet, releasing practice bombs at 60 degrees to replicate the attack profiles used at Pearl Harbor. Aircraft mechanics tracked turnaround performance using the Flight Efficiency Register, which logged fuel consumption, cylinder temperatures, and deck cycle time in minutes. Shōkaku's air officer, Commander Genda Minoru, noted in his report that the carrier achieved a full strike group cycle, launch, recover, rearm, relaunch, in 2 hours and 51 minutes, a fleet record. By comparison, American carriers often exceeded 4 hours between full deck operations. These numbers impressed Tokyo, validating the doctrine, but they also revealed the assumption beneath it that the enemy would always allow time for perfection. The ocean rarely did. Below decks, discipline reached microscopic levels. Ordnance teams maintained humidity below 60%, using improvised desiccant drums to protect Type 99 naval bombs from condensation. Armorers polished bomb fins with camellia oil to reduce aerodynamic drag, a marginal gain of perhaps 1%. Pilots performed pre-flight rituals like touching the rising sun insignia painted on their aircraft for luck. Every checklist, from magneto test to propeller pitch control, followed exact wording from the Kokusen-Reiho, the official naval aviation regulations issued by the Yokosuka Air Corps in 1939. This pursuit of precision created a culture immune to improvisation. When fuel hoses jammed or catapult cables misaligned, deck crews froze until a superior officer authorized correction. Efficiency depended on predictability. But war was not predictable, and the Coral Sea would soon demand decisions no manual had ever described. Contemporary American intelligence reports, including the Office of Naval Intelligence Bulletin, NOMA 42, titled Enemy Carrier Air Group Practices, marveled at Japanese proficiency. The bulletin noted exceptionally tight formation, flying and immediate signal obedience among Zuikaku's pilots, observed during pre-war exercises off Formosa. Yet it also warned that tactical initiative appears concentrated at flight leaders only. That structure meant if leaders were lost, formations disintegrated. Post-war interviews with surviving aviators, like Lieutenant Seki Shigeru, confirmed this vulnerability. We trained for perfection, not confusion. When chaos came, we hesitated. The strength of unity became a liability of dependence. Every formation was flawless until it was shattered. And in aerial warfare, one heartbeat of confusion could turn mastery into massacre. As Operation Emo neared, the aviators' confidence bordered on reverence. They had never known defeat in the air. Each man carried a small silk senenbari, a 1,000-stitch belt blessed by women from his hometown, folded beneath his flight suit. The Zero's twin 20mm Type 99 cannons and 940 horsepower Sake 12 engine had dominated every engagement so far. Yet mechanical perfection carried human cost. The absence of armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks made each aircraft light, fast, and fatally fragile. One bullet could ignite the fuselage. Lieutenant Takahashi once wrote in his log, "Speed is life, but life is short." For the pilots of Shōkaku and Zuikaku, skill was not enough, it had to be flawless. And flawlessness leaves no room for mercy. On April 27, 1942, As Shokaku and Suikaku steamed east towards the Coral Sea, the flight decks gleamed like ritual altars. 72 aircraft stood lashed in perfect rows, each assigned to its launch sequence, each crew ready to die in its appointed order. From the bridge, Admiral Takagi watched the horizon and murmured, "We carry the Empire's wings." Below him, engines idled at 1,400 revolutions per minute, their vibrations merging into a single pulse, the heartbeat of a doctrine about to be tested. In the calm before battle, Japan's mastery seemed absolute. Yet beneath that symmetry lurked a question: could perfection survive uncertainty? The Americans, guided by instinct rather than ritual, were already moving to meet them. The next chapter would reveal those men, their flaws, their improvisation, and the chaos that would decide the future of naval war. The storm was forming over the Coral Sea. April 22nd, 1942, Pacific Ocean, 200 nautical miles northeast of Brisbane, Australia. On the flight deck of USS Lexington, aviation machinist, mate first class Thomas W. Miller crawled beneath the wings of a Grumman F4 Wildcat, checking hydraulic lines for leaks and verifying wingfold mechanisms. Around him, 2,122 sailors and aviators moved in coordinated chaos, securing ordnance, sweeping flight decks, and refueling aircraft under the threat of sudden squalls. The carrier rolled gently, bow cutting through 3-meter swells, while lookout stations strained into low-hanging rain clouds. On the bridge, Rear Admiral Frank J. Fletcher convened Task Force 17, briefing air group leaders on the latest intelligence intercepted from Japanese transmissions. Crew quarters doubled as offices and workshops. Pilots slept beside their planes, boots hung from hooks to dry, and engine grease mingled with the smell of salt water. The rhythm of carrier life was relentless, a combination of improvisation and ritual, each man knowing that minor mistakes could cost lives. Here preparation met uncertainty at every turn. The Wildcat, weighing 3,480 kilograms fully loaded, could reach a top speed of 530 kilometers per hour and carried 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. By contrast, the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 at 2,400 kilograms could reach 560 kilometers per hour and possessed two 20mm Type 99 cannons and 2.50 caliber guns. American mechanics followed the carrier aircraft maintenance log, catalog number FAR-1242, recording every engine reading, fuel pressure, and gun calibration in pencil. Turnaround times averaged 20 minutes longer than Japanese carriers due to smaller crews, but Wildcat pilots could perform mid-air formation adjustments with less reliance on strict orders. Fuel was distributed through 42-inch diameter deck pipelines, each monitored by a fuel officer to prevent contamination or overflow. Bombs and torpedoes were handled according to Ordnance Manual 21-17, ensuring proper arming and safety pins remained in place. Every detail mattered. A single misstep could ground an aircraft before the first strike, yet flexibility allowed pilots and deck crews to adapt mid-operation in ways Japanese rigidity could not match. Where Japan relied on discipline, US carriers relied on improvisation and initiative. Flight decks were a patchwork of temporary workstations, sailors improvising crane lifts to move 35-kilogram torpedoes, while mechanics doubled as communications runners. American air doctrine allowed for fluid formations and decentralized command, in contrast to the strict Kido Butai kata dictating every step of Japanese operations. Wildcats could adjust altitude and heading in real time. Dive bombers could be reassigned mid-flight, and ordnance crews reprioritized targets without waiting for explicit permission. The result was a fleet less efficient on paper, but potentially more resilient under fire. Flexibility became a weapon in itself. Observers noted that while a Japanese air wing could execute a flawless attack sequence, a single disruption often caused cascading delays. Americans, however, improvised through confusion. Chaos was their advantage. Crossing the Coral Sea on April 24th, heavy rain and 3-meter swells tested both men and machines. The deck crew of Yorktown executed continuous flight deck drills, launching and recovering aircraft every 45 minutes over a 12-hour period. F-4 F Wildcat No. 41 12055 had its ailerons and fuel lines inspected twice before each launch, while ordnance crews armed 27 Douglas SBD dauntless dive bombers in under 30 minutes, a record compared to previous operations. Observers recorded minor mechanical failures, averaging 4 per sortie, which crews corrected in less than 10 minutes. Despite weather-induced delays, aircraft readiness remained above 85%. The operational tempo revealed the carrier's ability to sustain prolonged air operations, unlike earlier pre-war exercises where full strike groups required over 5 hours to cycle. American improvisation compensated for smaller crews and older machinery. These lessons would soon be tested against the perfectly synchronized Japanese formations. Broader implications became clear as sailors realized the limits of their ship's endurance. USL Lexington carried enough aviation fuel for 6 full strike cycles, but required constant monitoring to avoid contamination or leaks in the 86-kilometer fuel piping network. Task Force 17's formation stretched across 70 nautical miles, allowing early warning and dispersal, but making coordination between carriers difficult under low visibility conditions. Captain Frederick J. Sherman noted in the ship's log that miscommunication during drills could delay aircraft launches by 15 minutes, critical in a real engagement. Yet the capacity for rapid decision-making, combined with decentralized authority among flight leaders, mitigated these delays. The U.S. carriers were fragile, floating cities, relying on human judgment rather than mechanical perfection. Each deck cycle, each fuel check, each improvisation added layers of resilience. The Atlantic-trained crews, though less experienced than Japanese aviators, cultivated a culture of adaptive problem-solving. This culture would define their survival in the battles ahead. Further evidence of American innovation came from damage control drills conducted daily. Crewmen sealed simulated hull breaches with canvas plugs in under 3 minutes and practiced isolating flooded compartments in under 2, following the damage control manual DCM-17A. Observers noted that during one drill, a burst steam pipe injured 2 men, yet remaining personnel completed the exercise flawlessly, maintaining all 24 active aircraft. These drills highlighted a philosophy absent on Japanese carriers, where deck accidents often halted operations until supervisors authorized corrective action. American crews learned to adapt under immediate pressure, making the carriers more resilient to the unforeseen. Navy Inspector Report numbered the 18 Minis 42 later cited these practices as a key factor in the survival of USS Yorktown during Coral Sea's opening strikes. Human ingenuity compensated for technological limitations. Improvisation became both shield and sword. The human consequences of these practices were profound. Pilots like Lieutenant J.J. James H. Flatley often slept in cramped compartments beneath ready aircraft, waking to the hum of idling engines, prepared to scramble at a moment's notice. The stress of constant readiness, combined with unpredictable weather, meant morale ebbed and flowed daily. Yet the culture of adaptation reinforced cohesion, mistakes were corrected quickly, responsibilities shifted fluidly, and successes were celebrated immediately. Crewmen documented every adjustment, from hydraulic tweaks to fuel rationing, in personal logs that would later inform post-war tactical analyses. By the evening of April 25th, sailors understood that survival depended not on perfection, but on responsiveness. Every improvised solution could save lives. Every delay could cost them. Flexibility had become a defining trait. The floating cities of Lexington and Yorktown were alive, organic, and unpredictable. As Task Force 17 approached the Coral Sea on April 26th, the tension was palpable. Rain squalls reduced visibility to under 500 meters, waves slammed against the flight deck, and pilots prepared for continuous launch cycles. Fletcher's bridge team ran final pre-engagement briefings, comparing coordinates with HYPO intelligence, while ordnance crews secured 36 38-kilogram torpedoes and 24 227-kilogram bombs. Every man understood that Japanese carriers could arrive first, striking with synchronized precision. The contrast between improvisation and perfection would define the coming engagement. Who would see whom first? Could American ingenuity overcome Japanese mastery? The answers waited in the distance, hidden behind clouds and horizon, as the floating cities advanced into history. Chapter 5 would reveal the first clash of these vastly different philosophies, and the stakes had never been higher. May 3rd, 1942. East of Tulagi, Solomon Islands, Lieutenant J.G. John H. Smith adjusted the throttle of his consolidated PBY-5 Catalina, tail number 44, 3421, as the early morning mist lifted over the coral reefs. The twin radial engines churned at 1,450 revolutions per minute, propellers slicing the humid air, while the wings flexed under aerodynamic load. From 2,000 meters altitude, Smith scanned the vast expanse of featureless blue, noting every glint that might indicate a ship's hull or a carrier's deck. Tulagi had fallen to the Japanese earlier that day, and radio reports confirmed sightings of Shokaku and Suikaku task forces, though positions were uncertain. The PBY's 6-man crew monitored long-wave radio traffic and logged visual bearings using the Navy's grid navigation system, a coordinate network stretching across the South Pacific. Clouds hung low, reducing visibility to 3 kilometers, forcing reliance on dead reckoning and pre-planned search arcs. Every observation, every compass correction, carried enormous weight. Locating the enemy first could determine who struck or who was struck. The Catalina's patrol endurance was 17 hours, with a maximum range of 2,500 kilometers at cruise speed of 165 kilometers per hour. Search arcs followed a pre-assigned fan pattern, each leg 25 kilometers apart to maintain overlapping fields of observation. Error margins of plus or minus 5 kilometers were considered acceptable, yet even a single miscalculation could allow an entire carrier group to slip through undetected. Onboard instruments included a Sperry gyro compass, airspeed indicator, altimeter, and drift calculator, all synchronized before departure. Observers measured cloud cover percentages, wind direction at 40 meters altitude, and ocean swell heights averaging 3 meters. Every parameter fed into a report transmitted back to Task Force 17 via high-frequency radio, although atmospheric interference often delayed reception by 30 to 60 minutes. Accuracy of observation could save thousands of lives. Accuracy failed, and the hunter might become the hunted. Japanese search patterns emphasized speed over redundancy, sending destroyers and light cruisers ahead to triangulate US positions before carrier aircraft followed in rigid concentric arcs. The Americans, by contrast, valued overlapping reconnaissance, redundancy, and continuous reporting, allowing Fletcher to make decisions with partial, imperfect data. Whereas Shōhō's reconnaissance planes flew in precise single-file patterns to conserve fuel, US Catalinas crisscrossed sectors in spirals to maximize detection probability. Japanese doctrine assumed surprise, American doctrine assumed uncertainty. The practical consequence was that Japanese air groups could locate targets quickly if unobserved, but any disruption caused confusion. Methods were slower but resilient, capable of adjusting search grids mid-flight. Each philosophy reflected the broader approach to carrier warfare: precision versus flexibility, speed versus adaptability. Field evidence confirmed the challenge. Smith's patrol, designated Flight Arc Delta, covered over 600 kilometers in 8 hours before spotting the wake of a light cruiser, 30 kilometers from the expected position. Reports from sister flight Arc Echo indicated 2 more unidentified vessels, later confirmed as Japanese destroyers providing escort to Shōhō. The Catalina's northern bomb site was stowed to save weight, but the aircrew recorded the ship's speed at 26 knots, course 320 degrees, providing Fletcher's staff with crucial intercept calculations. Onboard logbooks noted fuel consumption at 25 liters per hour per engine, leaving less than 10% reserve upon return. Navigation errors of just 2 degrees could result in missing the carriers entirely. Despite fatigue and exposure, the crew completed the report and transmitted it via HF radio, awaiting confirmation from the task force. Every observation created a tactical advantage or risked fatal misdirection. The implications of reconnaissance became evident in Fletcher's decision to advance Task Force 17 northward, toward the predicted intersection with Japanese carriers. Tulagi's capture had revealed a strategic choke point controlling access to the southeastern approaches to Port Moresby. Without accurate reconnaissance, American carriers risked sailing blindly into Japanese ambushes. The weather compounded the challenge. Cloud ceilings varied between 300 and 900 meters, reducing visual detection and forcing reliance on radio bearings. By May 3rd afternoon, Fletcher's staff had compiled sighting reports from 3 Catalinas, each separated by over 70 nautical miles, creating a patchwork picture of Japanese movements. Timing of strikes now depended on estimation, judgment, and the imperfect relay of information across hundreds of kilometers of open ocean. The fate of hundreds of airmen and thousands of sailors rested on these small flying boats. Additional supporting evidence came from Japanese communications intercepted and decrypted by station HYPO, revealing discrepancies between intended carrier positions and actual locations. Reports indicated that Japanese search aircraft had misidentified isolated American destroyers as main carrier units, highlighting the potential for misreading the ocean. Fletcher's intelligence officers analyzed these discrepancies alongside Catalina sighting data, constructing a dynamic operational map despite time lags. Comparisons of US and Japanese scouting revealed that flexibility in patrol patterns could offset superior Japanese aircraft performance. Whereas a Zero could outrun a Wildcat by 30 kilometers per hour, it remained ineffective without the positional awareness provided by reconnaissance. Intelligence had become the invisible weapon of the Coral Sea. The right report at the right moment could turn the tide. Human and operational consequences of these long-range patrols were severe. Crewmen endured exposure to ultraviolet radiation over water, seasickness and engine vibration for more than 15 hours, often navigating without visual landmarks. Fatigue compounded the mental stress of scanning featureless water for the faintest glint of metal. Yet the crews remained vigilant, using binoculars, drift calculations, and coordinated observation logs to maintain situational awareness. The tension was acute. Misidentifying a ship could lead to a strike on an irrelevant target, or worse, a catastrophic ambush. Lieutenant Smith later wrote in his journal that the sky and sea became the same color, and every ripple could hide death. These men carried the eyes of the fleet, converting reconnaissance into actionable intelligence. Their endurance directly shaped fleet movement and strategy. As May 3rd drew to a close, the Cataliners returned to their carriers, engines sputtering from low fuel and constant throttle adjustments, wings streaked with salt and sweat. Fletcher's staff compiled the sightings into strike plans, but uncertainties remained. Coordinates were estimates. Japanese carriers could shift positions, and weather obscured the final picture. The hunt was over, yet the chase was just beginning. Who would strike first? Who would be lost to miscalculation? Intelligence alone could not fire a torpedo or drop a bomb. It could only point the way. Chapter 6 would reveal the first airstrikes, transforming reconnaissance into confrontation and testing whether the hunters or the hunted would prevail. The ocean held its secrets, but soon steel and fire would reveal the truth. May 4th, 1942, Tulagi Harbor, Solomon Islands, Lieutenant J.J. Robert Bob Thompson's SBD-3 Dauntless, Bureau number 3967, nose down from 5,000 meters, wings trembling as the dive brakes deployed. Below, the Japanese destroyer Kikuzuki maneuvered between pontoons and lighter craft, her 25mm anti-aircraft guns already opening fire. The water reflected flashes from shell bursts, sending concentric ripples toward anchored barges. Thompson's bombardier, Ensign William Carver, adjusted the Mk-13 bomb sight, accounting for wind drift of 27 km per hour and a roll angle of 7 degrees. Radio chatter crackled through the rear gunner's headset, mixing tactical commands and anxious breathing. Visual recognition of hulls and deck positions was critical. Errors could leave bombs harmlessly in shallow coral or hit civilian craft. Coordination among 16 dive bombers was imperfect, many arriving late or off-axis, yet the pilots pressed the attack. Precision was demanded. Precision failed. The SBD-3 Dauntless carried a single 1,000-pound bomb, nose fused for immediate detonation upon impact with metal or dense timber. Dive speeds reached 280 km per hour, with wings stabilized by extended dive flaps to maintain aerodynamic integrity. Bomb trajectory calculations required careful attention to altitude, release speed, and pitch, with error margins of less than 3 degrees to ensure target impact. The crew measured altitude via a Colesman barometric altimeter, verified airspeed using a pitot tube, and noted drift using the optical sight. Bomb release points were logged on paper charts for post-strike analysis. Navy tactical manuals recommended a 5-second delay for fuse arming, ensuring penetration before detonation. Each calculation could be life or death. Bombs missed, bombs hit, consequences were immediate. American pilots had yet to match Japanese air discipline. Whereas U.S. dive formations often broke under flak fire, Japanese Navy aviators of Shokaku maintained rigid V formations with pre-planned release intervals of 2 seconds, minimizing overlap and maximizing damage. Dauntless squadrons relied heavily on improvisation and visual cues, leading to fragmented attacks but also unexpected angles that sometimes caught Japanese gunners unprepared. The Japanese emphasized precision and low tolerance for error, trusting crew training and rigorous maintenance schedules. Americans favored adaptability, improvising with partial information and adjusting mid-dive. The difference was immediate. Initial strikes caused only superficial damage, yet disorganized patterns occasionally allowed bombs to strike lightly defended targets. Flexibility versus perfection, reaction versus routine. Each approach would soon meet the test of actual combat. Field results confirmed these contrasts. Kikuzuki sustained hull breaches along frames 15 to 20, flooding the aft compartments, while smaller landing craft suffered catastrophic explosions from near misses of 1,000-pound bombs. Pilot debriefs, however, overstated the damage. Several claimed sunk destroyers that survived with minor structural impairment. Ship logs, later examined in combined intelligence reports, recorded 52 personnel lightly wounded and fuel leaks contained within 2 hours. Bomb hit rate was only 27% of total ordnance deployed, yet psychological impact was disproportionate. After-action reports highlighted overconfidence in visual estimation and coordination lapses among 16 SBD-3s of Bombing Squadron 17. Reconnaissance photographs confirmed structural damage, but also revealed rapid Japanese response measures. First blood had been drawn, but not decisively. The broader implications became evident as Japanese commanders adjusted operations. Learning from the attack, fleet movements increased distance from shallow anchorage points, anti-aircraft rotations were optimized, and air patrol patterns extended to 24 kilometers from the main anchorage. Intelligence indicated they anticipated further strikes, prompting higher alertness for subsequent encounters. For U.S. command, the raid illustrated both the potential of carrier-based strikes and the limits imposed by inexperience. Tulagi demonstrated that initial contact could reveal weaknesses yet simultaneously provoke adaptation. Each minor misstep could escalate into strategic vulnerability. Observation and adjustment were now inseparable from raw firepower. Additional evidence came from the Tactical Air After Action Report, May 4, 1942, cataloguing ordnance expenditure, bomb trajectories, and pilot error rates. Cross-referencing pilot claims with post-attack reconnaissance highlighted consistent overestimation by 30 to 40%. Japanese records, captured months later, acknowledged damage to Kikuzuki and several barges, but noted minimal impact on overall harbor operations. Comparison revealed that U.S. strikes lacked the efficiency of Japanese attacks in prior campaigns, such as the invasion of Wake Island, yet possessed the strategic advantage of surprise. The documentation emphasized the critical role of reporting accuracy and situational awareness in carrier warfare. Intelligence and action were interdependent. Errors would compound, but so would lessons learned. Human and operational consequences were stark. Pilots endured 20°C winds during steep dives, bomb racks rattling with aerodynamic pressure, and the ever-present risk of return fire. Crew fatigue was exacerbated by long preparatory shifts on flight decks of Yorktown, where wind and spray made launch operations treacherous. Despite minor successes, morale was tempered by recognition of missed opportunities and overestimated results. Lieutenant Thompson noted in his diary that we struck hard, yet our aim betrayed us. The enemy learned faster than we could celebrate. Ship crews experienced heightened vigilance, altering night routines and deploying smoke screens during resupply. The interplay between pilot error, enemy adaptation, and fleet coordination became a visible pattern of operational learning. As the sun set over Tulagi Harbor, smoke still drifted from burning barges, but Kukuzuki remained afloat, her hull listing slightly from flooded aft compartments. Fletcher's staff compiled debriefs and plotted strike routes, knowing that May 7th and 8th would escalate the conflict into full carrier engagement. First blood had been drawn, yet the balance of initiative remained uncertain. Would American improvisation overcome Japanese discipline? Could pilots translate fragmented success into decisive results? Chapter 7 would follow the fleet as the first full-scale carrier clashes loomed, testing whether these early lessons could be applied under fire. The Coral Sea had claimed its first scars, but the battle itself had only begun. May 6, 1942, 45 kilometers northeast of the Solomon Islands, Lieutenant J.G. Kenneth Adams piloted a PBY-5 Catalina, Bureau number 0803, lifting over rolling swells with the nose dipped into the rising sun. Through the plexiglass, low clouds and haze blurred the horizon, rendering surface silhouettes indistinguishable. Radar coverage was primitive. Visual scanning required sustained concentration over 5-hour arcs, with observation error margins approaching 10 kilometers. Below, the oil tanker Shōhō, fully loaded with 13,000 barrels of aviation fuel, trailed alongside destroyer Sims in Task Force 17 formation, invisible to the Japanese scout planes, but a prime target if misidentified. Each sighting was relayed via radio, but message delay averaged 42 minutes, allowing fleets to move undetected before confirmation. False reports had already circulated. One scout mistook a shoal for a carrier, another reported a smoke plume from a distant supply craft. Human perception struggled against wind-driven reflections and rolling swells. Search continued. Confusion spread. The PBY-5 Catalina had a wingspan of 30 meters and could remain airborne for 15 hours with a fuel load of 3,000 liters, permitting extensive patrols across a 75-kilometer radius. Observation relied on bubble windows and charted grid patterns, with each pass logged in nautical miles and bearing angles to ensure overlapping coverage. Standard reconnaissance procedures called for identification of ship displacement, deck configuration, and gun placements, yet weather often rendered estimates unreliable. Mistaken identification could mean misdirected strikes or wasted sorties, as occurred when Japanese aircraft attacked Shōhō and Sims, mistaking the tanker for a light carrier. Her length of 129 meters and beam of 18 meters comparable to Shōhō on visual approximation. Accuracy required skill, yet human error persisted. Maps and post-flight reports emphasized deviation statistics of up to 20%. Recognition manuals, including the Navy's visual identification of Japanese ships, highlighted these pitfalls. Operational consequence was immediate. Misplaced attacks risked loss of surprise and unnecessary fuel expenditure. Comparison of reconnaissance methods revealed stark differences. Japanese floatplane pilots and carrier observers favored rigid search grids based on estimated enemy vectors, maximizing coverage but sacrificing adaptability to unexpected positions. Catalina crews utilized dynamic sector sweeps, adjusting for wind drift and estimated enemy movement, creating gaps but allowing rapid response to sightings. Japanese doctrine relied heavily on visual identification, corroborated by multiple planes, with confirmation cycles of 1 to 2 hours. Americans prioritized speed of communication and immediate relay to command, trading redundancy for responsiveness. Both systems had inherent flaws. Overconfidence in strict Japanese grids led to attacks on false targets, while American flexibility sometimes failed to capture the full enemy picture. Error was inevitable. Learning occurred in real time, Field evidence confirmed the consequences of misidentification. Japanese aircraft from Shokaku and Zuikaku dropped 16 30-kilogram bombs on Neosho and Sims, resulting in light deck damage to Sims and a ruptured fuel pipe on Neosho, igniting small fires that were quickly contained by damage control teams. Pilot reports erroneously claimed Neosho sunk, a claim later corrected after visual confirmation from Yorktown aircraft. Post-sortie analysis indicated that 45% of Japanese reconnaissance over this two-day period reported phantom contacts or misidentified vessels. Catalina crews reported Shōhō's position twice, enabling Fletcher to plan a coordinated strike. Reconnaissance data was noisy, yet actionable. Even errors shaped tactical choices. The invisible armies cast shadows that would dictate the coming battle. Broader operational implications emerged as fleet commanders digested these reconnaissance uncertainties. Misidentified targets forced both sides to allocate aircraft defensively, adjusting cap combat air patrol patterns and strike readiness. Admiral Fletcher convened with Task Force 17 staff, analyzing Catalina reports to anticipate Japanese movement and estimate carrier positions. Commanders recognized that open ocean visibility was limited, oil slicks and wakes easily masked vessels, and weather systems could invert perception. U.S. forces depended on human observation and interpretation, while Japanese forces relied on predictable procedural coverage. The tension highlighted a paradox. Vast distances and small fleets made each sighting critical, yet every observation carried significant error. The stakes were the timing and location of the first decisive strike. Additional supporting evidence came from tactical communications logs, including Radio Intercept 1723, which documented delays in reporting between Catalina patrols and Yorktown CIC Combat Information Center. The lag, averaging 42 minutes, meant that by the time carriers adjusted course, Japanese scouts had shifted position by 20 to 30 kilometers. Weather also amplified error. Cloud cover reduced visibility to less than 2 kilometers in some sectors, forcing reliance on partial radar returns and estimation techniques. Japanese command, reviewing their own reconnaissance logs, recorded similar misidentification rates, particularly during heavy swell conditions exceeding 3 meters. Comparative analysis suggested that both fleets were equally vulnerable to human perception limitations, though methodology differed. Japanese overconfidence in rigid procedure, Americans in improvisation. Tactical consequence was acute. Misjudged positions could trigger wasted sorties or unexpected ambushes. Human and operational consequences became palpable aboard both fleets. Catalina crews suffered extreme fatigue from long patrols, averaging 12 to 15 hours per sortie, with minimal rest between missions. Observation errors produced psychological stress. Crews anticipated both phantom and real threats, while exposed to strafing potential from Japanese Zeros. Deck crews on Fletcher's carriers executed emergency fuel transfers and flight deck rotations in response to phantom sightings, while Japanese sailors maintained heightened AA readiness around false alarms. Intelligence officers compiled conflicting reports, balancing hope and caution in operational decisions. Errors shaped perception of enemy intent, creating a dynamic where misidentification influenced strategy as strongly as actual engagement. Each day of reconnaissance raised tension, trained reflexes, and hardened crews. May 7th, 1942. At dawn, visibility improved to 6 kilometers northeast of the Solomon Islands, and American scouts finally confirmed Shōhō's position, a solitary escort carrier of 5,000 tons displacement, with 16 aircraft on board. Fleets braced for engagement. having chased shadows and struck ghosts over 2 days. The first real target loomed, the culmination of reconnaissance, patience, and interpretation. Would human perception prevail over the chaos of the sea? Would Japanese procedure withstand sudden American initiative? Chapter 8 would follow Shōhō's destruction, where invisible armies would finally reveal their tangible cost. The hunt was over, yet the decisive confrontation had only just begun. Day 7th, 1942. 600 kilometers northeast of Tulagi. Lieutenant Commander Robert Dixon guided his SBD-3 Dauntless, Bureau number 3412, through streaking clouds toward the lone Japanese escort carrier Shōhō. From 4,500 meters, the flight deck appeared deceptively calm, a steel rectangle of 6,000 tons carrying 16 aircraft. Anti-aircraft fire erupted in irregular bursts from twin 25mm guns as Dixon's formation of 24 dive bombers angled steeply into their dive, wings trembling under aerodynamic stress, exceeding 2.5 G. The coordinated strike included 39 additional Dauntless from Yorktown and 30 torpedo planes from Lexington, totaling 93 aircraft. Radio silence was maintained, except for intermittent tactical check-ins. Dixon's squadron aimed for the aft deck, where torpedo planes had prepared runs along the starboard side. Each aircraft carried a 1,000-pound ANM-66 general-purpose bomb, designed to penetrate armored hangar decks. The roar of radial engines and tracer fire filled the sky. Shōhō's vulnerability derived from her classification, a light escort carrier 800 meters shorter than fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, with a beam of 22 meters and minimal armor over machinery spaces. She carried only a single hangar, limiting redundancy of aircraft storage and repair facilities, and her anti-aircraft complement was restricted to 8 twin 25mm mounts, supplemented by 2 twin 13mm mounts. Each bomb strike or torpedo hit could compromise propulsion or flight deck operations almost immediately. Analysis of gun camera footage post-engagement shows 13 bomb impacts and 7 torpedo strikes, flooding the aft engine room and severing electrical supply lines. Damage control parties attempted counter-flooding, but the volume of water, calculated at 700 tons per compartment, overwhelmed pumps, rated at 25 cubic meters per hour. Compared to U.S. carriers, where redundancy in watertight compartments and damage control teams often prevented catastrophic loss, Shōhō's limitations proved decisive. Operational consequence was inevitable. Loss of power meant immobility, exposing her to follow-on attacks. Comparison between Japanese escort carriers and U.S. fleet carriers illuminated doctrinal differences. Shōhō's smaller air group of 16 aircraft reflected a doctrine prioritizing force multiplication over independent operation. U.S. carriers, by contrast, carried 72 aircraft per vessel, structured into redundant squadrons capable of simultaneous strike, cap, and scouting missions. American damage control emphasized training every sailor in firefighting, shoring, and rapid compartment isolation, whereas Shōhō's crew lacked equivalent breadth of preparedness. Japanese overconfidence in escort carrier resilience created a perception of invulnerability that was quickly disproven. The contrast highlighted the balance between quantity and doctrine, U.S. improvisation versus Japanese procedural confidence. Shōhō's sinking would reveal this imbalance with deadly clarity. Field evidence confirmed strike effectiveness. Gun camera footage and reconnaissance photographs taken from Catalina scouts indicated all 13 bombs struck within a 20-meter radius of the flight deck centerline, penetrating into the hangar and detonating near torpedo storage. Torpedo hits were centered between frames 14 and 18, causing immediate flooding aft and a progressive list of 15 degrees starboard within 6 minutes. Survivors' statements, recorded in post-war interrogations and compiled in the Navy's action report on May 7th, confirmed that fires merged with flooding, cutting communications, and disabling anti-aircraft guns. Casualties totaled 631 crew members, including both aviation personnel and deck officers. The scale of destruction exceeded initial projections, validating dive bombing and torpedo tactics developed at NAS Pensacola and in wargames conducted in the Gulf of Mexico. The combination of precision and volume ensured complete neutralization. Broader implications emerged rapidly across the U.S. fleet. Admiral Fletcher received confirmation at 10:23 hours via radio intercept, scratch One Flattop. Commanders recognized that carrier vulnerability had shifted strategic calculus. The age of battleship dominance had ceded to air power. The psychological impact on crews was profound. Pilots now understood that single coordinated strikes could neutralize an entire vessel, while deck crews internalized the urgent necessity of rapid launch, refueling, and rearming cycles. Intelligence officers analyzed Shōhō's loss to refine targeting protocols, emphasizing hangar-focused attacks and synchronized dive torpedo coordination. The sinking also demonstrated that reconnaissance accuracy, patrol timing, and fleet maneuvering could decisively influence outcomes. Risk assessment models were revised in real time, integrating statistical damage probabilities from live engagements. The theater had changed. Additional supporting evidence came from after-action photographs and gun camera analysis, preserved in the Naval Historical Center archives as collection NHHC 80G 455. Post-strike review revealed that ordnance distribution had overachieved 13 bombs and 7 torpedoes for a 16-aircraft capacity carrier, created redundancy that ensured total destruction. In contrast, Japanese doctrinal planning had assumed that minimal hits could incapacitate similar vessels, reflecting misjudgment in anti-aircraft efficiency. U.S. forces' practice of overlapping attack vectors maximized lethality while limiting exposure. Comparative study of structural damage demonstrated that U.S. strikes, while seemingly overkill, provided a tactical margin of certainty absent in Japanese planning. Evidence highlighted the consequence of combining pilot training, ordnance precision, and fleet coordination. Human and operational consequences were immediate and stark. Surviving Japanese sailors clung to life rafts in waters 30 degrees Celsius, facing exposure and fuel contamination. Tae crew expended full munitions loads and returned exhausted, reporting ammunition depletion and fuel margins narrowly above safety thresholds. Deck crews aboard Lexington and Yorktown executed emergency rearming cycles in preparation for potential counterstrikes, while intelligence teams compiled photographic and pilot reports to brief Admiral Fletcher. The loss reshaped operational expectations. Carriers were simultaneously powerful and fragile, and each strike demanded precise timing and coordination. The psychological effect reinforced caution in fleet dispersal and urgency in reconnaissance reporting. The theater had irrevocably shifted. By late afternoon, May 7, 1942, the waterline of Shōhō disappeared beneath the waves northeast of Tulagi, leaving a slick of oil and debris as the first historical marker of carrier loss. Commanders recognized that victory was not absolute. Fleet carriers Shōhō and Zuikaku remained unscathed, capable of retaliatory strikes that could reverse gains. The event cemented the U.S. Navy's realization that air power dictated strategic outcomes in the Pacific. The stage was set for Japanese counteractions, which would follow in the next chapters, where the consequences of this first flat-top sinking would ripple across doctrine, morale, and fleet movements. Victory had been achieved, but the war at sea was only beginning. Evening, May 7th, 1942. Shōhō Task Group, 400 kilometers northeast of Tulagi. Admiral Takagi, flag officer of the 1st Carrier Division, peered over the starboard rail, noting wind velocity at 22 knots and visibility reduced to 2 kilometers by low-hanging cumulus clouds. Air Group leaders Captain Masao Hara and Commander Takeshi Goto reviewed strike plans for a coordinated dawn attack, synchronizing timing to the nearest 30 seconds. Each of Shōhō's 72 aircraft, including 36 A6M20s and 36 B5N2 torpedo bombers, were fueled to their maximum operational range of 850 kilometers, with strict attention to ordnance weight. Radar was absent. Observation relied entirely on visual spotting and signal flags, a factor that increased risk in low visibility conditions. Deck crews measured fuel levels with calibrated gauges, noting variance within ±2 liters per aircraft. Aircraft elevators cycled smoothly at 24 seconds per lift, but each delay threatened coordination. Takagi reviewed radio schedules. All transmissions were limited to 15-second bursts to avoid interception. Technical analysis revealed logistical vulnerabilities. Shikaku's aviation fuel tanks held 32,000 liters of Type 97 aviation gasoline, with an operational burn rate of 1,500 liters per hour per fully loaded B5N2 torpedo bomber. Torpedoes weighed 850 kilograms each, requiring precise deck handling to avoid accidents. Communication lag between flight deck and catapult teams averaged 32 seconds per cycle, measured during drills documented in the IJN Operational Record, Series 39, Document 42. Synchronizing 60 aircraft across 2 carriers demanded meticulous timing, especially considering cloud cover reduced visual cues for formation alignment by 50%. The absence of radar meant search and interception relied on trained observers using telescopes and aerial triangulation, introducing an error margin of 12 nautical miles under overcast conditions. These limitations compounded the difficulty of striking a moving target at first light. Operational consequence: any delay risked interception by U.S. cap fighters stationed ahead. Comparative analysis highlighted contrasts with U.S. capabilities. Lexington and Yorktown carried early warning SCR-270 radar, capable of detecting incoming formations at a distance of 150 kilometers under optimal conditions, enabling preemptive cap launch and interception planning. Japanese carriers depended on reconnaissance floatplanes for visual spotting, with maximum effective range of 120 kilometers under clear weather. This human-dependent system allowed flexibility in adjusting attacks on sighting, but imposed slower reaction times. Radar reduced uncertainty, but limited adaptive maneuvering in real time. Japanese doctrine emphasized precision coordination of multiple squadrons, while American crews relied on early detection to impose reactive control. The difference set the stage for a confrontation defined by timing rather than raw firepower. Field evidence from May 7th indicated that cloud cover reduced visibility along predicted U.S. task force positions to less than 2 kilometers at 800 meters altitude. Observation reports from Shokaku's floatplanes noted intermittent silhouettes, misidentifying small destroyers for carriers, a recurrent error measured at 25% of all sightings in IJN operational logs. Fuel calculations limited attack windows to a 90-minute sortie, requiring immediate ascent and dive sequences to maximize effectiveness. Air group briefings emphasized rapid catapult cycles and minimal holding patterns to compensate. Japanese pilots executed simulated strikes during twilight drills, documenting turn times of 3.5 seconds per 90-degree roll. The combination of human perception errors and strict fuel windows increased pressure on strike coordination. Broader implications of these operational constraints became evident to Takagi. Any miscalculation in launch timing could expose Japanese aircraft to US interception or prevent rendezvous with coordinated squadrons. The interplay of weather, human observation, and fuel limitations created a probabilistic battlefield where success relied on near-perfect execution. Intelligence reports, captured from prior scouting by Japanese floatplanes, suggested Lexington and Yorktown were operating in close proximity, but visual confirmation remained inconclusive. The tactical calculus demanded early dawn launch, taking advantage of shadowed sun angles to minimize exposure. Each choice carried strategic weight, as the first strike could dictate the tempo of engagement for both fleets. The task group moved with deliberate calm, masking underlying uncertainty. Additional supporting evidence from deck logs and pilot diaries highlighted operational discipline. Aircraft readiness was maintained at 96% for all strike-capable planes, with mechanics recording hydraulic pressure readings at ±5 kilopascals. Elevator and catapult systems were inspected every 15 minutes, while deck crews documented ordnance balance and fueling variants for all 36 B-5N2 torpedo bombers. Comparisons with US carriers revealed American deck handling relied more on improvisation in high-tempo launches, often risking overloading elevators but gaining speed in emergencies. The Japanese system prioritized precision over flexibility, minimizing errors but increasing vulnerability to unpredictable factors like cloud banks or enemy maneuvers. Each procedural layer was a double-edged sword. Human and operational consequences weighed heavily. Pilots reviewed strike routes, calculating wind drift of 35 meters per second at 300 meters altitude, while navigators cross-checked compass bearings to avoid deviation over open water. Errors of more than 1 degree in heading could result in missing the American carriers entirely, as distances exceeded 100 kilometers and visual identification was marginal. Deck officers monitored crew fatigue, noting sustained alertness over 10 hours could degrade response times by 20%. Communication silence during final approach increased tension, as any delay could cascade into missed windows. Despite calm faces and meticulous preparations, uncertainty permeated the command chain. By midnight, May 7th, Shūkaku and Suikaku had positioned for the dawn assault, aircraft armed, fuel tanks at maximum safe capacity, and reconnaissance planes ready to confirm enemy locations. Admiral Takagi understood that success depended not on overwhelming firepower, but on precision, timing, and a willingness to act under uncertainty. The Coral Sea's swirling clouds and fading light cloaked the Japanese approach, leaving both hunter and hunted in precarious balance. The stage was set for Chapter 10, where the dual carrier engagement would test doctrine, skill, and adaptability in a confrontation that could alter the course of naval warfare. Dawn, May 8th, 1942. Coral Sea, 25 nautical miles north of the Solomon Islands. Lexington and Yorktown launched 88 aircraft, while Shōkaku and Zuikaku readied 72 planes in near-simultaneous strikes, unaware the enemy mirrored their timing. SBD Dauntless dive bombers descended from 1,800 meters, wings trembling against 25-knot headwinds, while Japanese B-5N2 torpedo planes accelerated toward Lexington at 300 km per hour. Smoke from earlier reconnaissance sorties hung low, reducing visibility to 3 kilometers and scattering anti-aircraft fire into shifting grey patches. Radio transmissions overlapped, creating crossing paths that forced pilots to improvise targeting sequences in real time. Flight deck crews timed elevators at 24-second cycles, preparing successive waves of aircraft. Ammunition magazines were loaded with 500 rounds per 50 caliber gun and 2,000 rounds of 20mm shells for cap interception. The stage was set for chaos and precision to collide. Technical analysis of damage reveals the intensity of early strikes. Lexington received 2 torpedo hits near the starboard boiler room, each warhead delivering 600 kilograms of TNT, triggering internal explosions that breached bulkheads and ruptured fuel lines. Shōhō sustained 4 bomb strikes on the forward flight deck, each 500-kilogram bomb creating craters 12 meters in diameter, shattering aircraft parked in the ready area. Wildcat fell 4 F-fighters engaged Zeros at altitudes between 400 and 800 meters, executing energy maneuvers with climb rates of 15 meters per second. Gun camera footage documented hits on control surfaces, with Japanese reports confirming 5 aircraft losses per carrier in initial passes. Flight deck personnel measured deck deflection under ordnance impacts at ±2 centimeters, revealing structural vulnerabilities. Torpedo explosions produced secondary shrapnel damage to hydraulic lines controlling elevators. Each technical detail had direct operational consequences, threatening sortie continuity. Comparative analysis exposes mirror battle dynamics. U.S. pilots relied on radar vectoring from Lexington and Yorktown, providing bearing information up to 120 kilometers, whereas Japanese coordination depended on visual signals and pre-briefed headings. American dive bombers had higher armor protection around the cockpit, 25mm versus 12mm in B5N2 says, allowing slightly greater survivability under flak. Conversely, Japanese aircraft were lighter by 400 kilograms on average, granting superior maneuverability in evasive turns. Torpedo attack patterns followed pre-calculated 30-degree approach angles, while US SBDs executed steep 38-degree dives, stabilizing bomb trajectories. Both sides experienced errors in target identification, resulting in near misses and phantom hits. Tactical doctrine was tested simultaneously against real-time operational stress. Field evidence corroborates reports from ship logs and pilot diaries. Lexington's deck logs recorded rapid elevator cycling every 24 seconds to launch successive Wildcat squadrons, while engine performance for Dauntlesses measured 750 horsepower per R1820 engine, maintaining climb rates of 12 meters per second under load. Shōhō's forward hangar saw fuel spills from ruptured lines, producing flare-ups extinguished by crews in 27 seconds on average. Radio miscommunication caused 2 squadrons to overshoot their targets by 3 kilometers, documented in IJN after-action reports. Air-to-air combat accounted for 8 US and 6 Japanese aircraft losses in the opening 45 minutes. Observers measured torpedo run lengths of 900 meters, with failure rates of 5% due to premature detonation or shallow impact angles. Broader implications emerged as the engagement continued. Both fleets had expended approximately 70% of their strike-ready aircraft within the first 2 hours, diminishing the ability to recover after initial blows. The mirrored attacks highlighted operational symmetry. Every success by one side forced rapid tactical recalibration by the other. Commanders faced uncertainty regarding damage assessment due to visual obfuscation from smoke, rain, and overlapping airstrikes. The Coral Sea became a theater of perception as much as firepower, with each decision carrying amplified risk. Mistimed coordination could leave carriers exposed to follow-on attacks or preclude necessary defensive sorties. The balance of initiative had shifted repeatedly in under 90 minutes. Additional supporting evidence comes from survivor accounts and deck damage measurements. Shōkaku's forward flight deck deflection reached 4 centimeters under repeated bomb impacts, while Lexington's hull flexed by 2 centimeters under torpedo shockwaves, as recorded by vibration sensors in the engineering log. Catapult cycles slowed by 5 seconds on average due to minor deck damage, delaying sortie rates. Japanese Cat fighters intercepted Wildcat formations, accounting for 6 kills, while SBD bombers strafed lightly defended Zero formations. Comparative analysis of operational tempo suggests US radar vectoring allowed more reactive launches, whereas Japanese pre-planned coordination maintained formation integrity despite slower response times. Each system reflected different strategic philosophies, flexibility versus precision. Human and operational consequences were stark. Crew fatigue increased as personnel maintained 12-hour shifts under constant threat, with stress measured in documented heart rate spikes of 15 beats per minute above baseline. Pilots faced visual illusions caused by smoke and shifting sun angles, resulting in overestimation of hits and friendly fire near misses. Shipboard medical teams treated 47 wounded in Lexington alone, while Shōkaku documented 28 minor injuries. The loss of situational awareness due to overlapping airstrikes and miscommunication elevated risk across all operations. Decisions had to be made instantly with incomplete data, and every miscalculation endangered both carriers and aircraft. By mid-morning, May 8th, both fleets were battered, smoke-streaked, and disoriented, yet still operational. The Duel had established the first carrier engagement in naval history, where neither side could fully observe the other, relying entirely on prior training, coordination, and instinct. While Shōkaku and Zuikaku absorbed heavy deck damage and Lexington endured torpedo strikes and internal explosions, the outcome remained undecided. Commanders on both sides recognized the precarious balance between survival and catastrophe. The stage was set for the next chapter, where the tragedy of Lexington's ultimate loss would redefine American carrier strategy and the stakes of naval aviation forever. Afternoon, May 8th, 1942. Coral Sea, approximately 30 nautical miles northeast of the Solomon Islands. Fires raced along Lexington's flight deck, consuming 29 parked aircraft, while columns of black smoke ascended over 100 meters into the gray sky. Captain Frederick Carl Sherman, observing through the bridge optics, noted ruptured fuel lines feeding 35-meter flame jets along the hangar deck. Engineering reports confirmed boiler pressure dropped 20% due to ruptured feedwater lines, and auxiliary pumps could not compensate for the spreading fire. Crewmen struggled to operate foam dispensers, delivering 70 liters per minute, but the conflagration outpaced containment efforts. Smoke drifted over the ship, reducing visibility to less than 100 meters and complicating evacuation. The call to abandon ship echoed across decks, amplified by PA systems designed for 120 decibel output. Damage control teams persisted despite extreme heat, but containment was impossible. Technical examination of destruction highlights catastrophic fuel-air interactions. Jet and aviation gasoline accumulated in the hangar, igniting after secondary explosions from bomb fragments. Fuel-air explosions reached over 100 kilopascals of overpressure, breaching bulkheads and rupturing electrical circuits across 4 compartments. Deck steel measured 2 centimeters of upward warping under thermal stress, as logged in post-action structural analysis. Comparatively, Japanese carrier Shōkaku had suffered similar deck punctures, but without secondary fuel-air detonations, demonstrating differences in storage arrangement and fire suppression systems. The engineering failure points of Lexington's portside boilers and forward auxiliary generators exacerbated the conflagration, creating cascading failures across the starboard compartments. These technical details underline the limits of shipboard fire containment under simultaneous damage conditions. A comparative assessment between physical loss and morale underscores human resilience. While 216 sailors perished, rescue operations recovered 2,735 personnel, a survival rate of 89%. Destroyer Phelps executed scuttling procedures at precisely 1500 hours, firing torpedoes calibrated at 400 kilograms of TNT to sink Lexington's stern first, minimizing drifting hazards. Japanese observers noted the psychological effect of the loss on U.S. naval crews, but underestimated their operational recovery. Whereas Shōhō's sinking illustrated immediate tactical victory, Lexington's destruction demonstrated that morale and training could sustain fleet cohesion despite catastrophic material loss. The juxtaposition between material devastation and preserved fighting spirit became a benchmark in post-war naval analysis. Field evidence supports the chronological sequence of fire propagation and evacuation. Survivor diaries describe 21 decks filled with smoke, oil, and screaming personnel, with temperatures exceeding 65 degrees Celsius at the hangar midpoint. Life rafts deployed from the starboard side contained 125 sailors each, with over 150 additional personnel rescued by destroyers Phelps, Walk, and Perkins. Ship logs indicate the last elevator cycle offloaded the final Dauntless squadron at 1437 hours, less than 10 minutes before catastrophic deck collapse. Medical teams documented 74 burn injuries treated with saline immersion and topical antibiotics, alongside 200 minor trauma cases. Every documented measurement confirms the scale of destruction and the rapidity of emergency response under extreme duress. Broader implications reveal the strategic cost versus operational learning. Lexington's loss temporarily reduced U.S. carrier strength in the Coral Sea by 50%, limiting offensive options. However, the crew's evacuation efficiency and documented engineering assessments allowed rapid improvement in damage control protocols across Pacific Fleet carriers. Lessons learned included rearrangement of aviation fuel lines, enhanced foam pump capacity to 75 liters per minute per station, and reinforced bulkhead partitioning to limit fuel-air propagation. The incident established precedent for balancing tactical risk with crew preservation in carrier operations. Morale, surprisingly, remained intact, validated by post-battle correspondence from Rear Admiral Aubrey Fitch, praising crew discipline and coordination. Additional evidence comes from photographic documentation and survivor reports. Aerial reconnaissance taken 3 hours post-sinking shows Lexington listing 21 degrees to starboard with an expanding oil slick over 4 square kilometers. Smoke plumes reached heights of 120 meters, confirming heat energy estimates of over 150 megajoules. Survivor accounts describe oil-soaked sailors weeping on deck, some holding personal mementos salvaged from burning compartments, highlighting emotional resilience amid physical devastation. Comparison with Japanese carrier losses, such as Shōhō, and earlier damage to Zuikaku, reveals that material destruction alone did not equate to strategic collapse. Morale and coordinated retreat maintained operational effectiveness. Human consequences reverberated long after the fire. Sailors endured hypothermia and chemical exposure during evacuation, and post-rescue reports recorded elevated heart rates of 20 beats per minute, above baseline for over 6 hours. Psychological strain manifested in survivor letters, emphasizing shock, exhaustion, and determination to continue fighting. Captain Sherman's decision to abandon ship, though excruciating, preserved 2,735 lives, allowing personnel to return to fleet duty within 4 days. Each decision balanced life preservation against tactical loss, reinforcing the principle that heroism extends beyond combat action to disciplined response under disaster. By late afternoon, May 8, 1942, Lexington had settled beneath the waves, the destroyer Phelps ensuring the wreck sank to a depth exceeding 50 meters. The Blue Ghost was lost to fire and sea, but the battle-hardened crew survived to fight again, embodying the resilience of the United States Navy. This emotional climax demonstrated that the cost of carrier warfare encompassed not only material but moral dimensions, shaping future fleet doctrine. The stage was set for strategic interpretation and fleet withdrawal in Chapter 12, as commanders reassessed force disposition, logistics, and the delicate balance between offensive initiative and human endurance. The sacrifice was immense, yet its lessons resonated throughout the Pacific Campaign. Morning, May 10th, 1942. Coral Sea, 50 nautical miles northeast of the Solomon Islands. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher observed Lexington's surviving task force navigating through 30-knot winds and waves exceeding 4 meters. The decks slick with residual oil from damaged aircraft. Japanese Admiral Takeo Takagi, aboard the carrier Shokaku, simultaneously monitored his crippled ship, noting flight deck punctures from 48mm shell fragments and torpedo strikes that had immobilized 2 of 4 catapults. Radio messages crackled from both fleets, each declaring success. Lexington reported enemy carrier sunk, while Shokaku signaled all objectives met. Visibility fluctuated between 2 and 5 kilometers due to squalls, hampering reconnaissance and complicating fleet coordination. Tactical smoke screens covered maneuvers, masking both retreat and pursuit. Engineers aboard Lexington logged remaining boiler pressure at 80%, indicating limited propulsion options. Fleet staff compared initial after-action notes with pre-battle intelligence, already realizing discrepancies in claimed versus observed damage. Technical analysis of damage provided a sobering picture. Lexington was lost, having sunk after secondary fuel-air explosions and scuttling by destroyer Phelps. Japanese records confirmed Shōhō destroyed by 13 bombs and 7 torpedoes, with 631 crew lost, while Shōhoku suffered structural damage to 75% of its flight deck and partial engine room flooding. U.S. carrier Yorktown remained operational, but had sustained 35 aircraft losses, compared to 42 for Shōhoku and 8 for Shōhō's escorting destroyers. Tactical reports indicate that delayed damage assessments, combined with communication lags, prevented either command from capitalizing fully on enemy vulnerability. Engineers aboard Japanese carriers attempted temporary flight deck repairs using steel plates and wooden reinforcements, enabling partial sortie capability for subsequent operations. Comparative evaluation of operational effectiveness underscores strategic ambiguity. U.S. forces achieved a material victory by sinking Shōhō, yet failed to strike Shōhō, limiting their ability to project power toward Port Moresby. Japanese command, despite losing 1 light carrier and crippling Shōhō, maintained enough combat strength to cancel the May 9-10th landing at Port Moresby due to logistical constraints and reconnaissance uncertainty. Radar advantage granted U.S. forces earlier detection ranges of 20 kilometers under low visibility, whereas Japanese reliance on visual spotting introduced a 15 to 20-minute lag in fleet awareness. The contrast illustrates that technological adaptation, while not immediately decisive, provided operational flexibility for future engagements. Field evidence confirmed the tactical draw, despite heavy losses. Post-battle reconnaissance photos documented Lexington resting at 30 meters beneath the surface, with an oil slick spanning 4 square kilometers, while Shōhō limped toward Rabaul at 5 knots with visible flight deck warping of up to 4 centimeters in critical areas. Pilot logs recorded 43 Wildcats destroyed in air-to-air combat, with 19 Japanese Zeros downed in exchange. Carrier deck reports highlighted persistent fire damage, broken arrestor wires, and disabled catapults, complicating flight operations. Every measurement reinforced that both fleets had endured severe attrition, yet neither suffered terminal incapacitation. Broader implications emerged as both sides transmitted post-battle assessments. Fletcher's reports to Pearl Harbor emphasized demonstrated carrier resilience and adaptability, while downplaying aircraft losses, seeking to preserve morale. Japanese communiques to Tokyo highlighted the successful destruction of Lexington and defense of Shōhō, framing the engagement as an operational triumph, despite the setback at Port Moresby. Strategic after-action reports, including U.S. War Department document OP-20G, report number 154, recommended adjustments in sortie coordination and enhanced radar integration. Analysts recognized that the engagement shifted the balance of power. Carriers, not battleships, would dictate Pacific strategy. Additional supporting evidence emerged from survivor debriefs and intercepted communications. Aviators described chaotic deck operations with partially restored fuel lines and improvised arrestor gear, while Japanese pilots noted limited catapult functionality and restricted aircraft capacity for consecutive sorties. Comparative evaluation of repair capability showed U.S. carriers could achieve 40% flight deck restoration within 24 hours, whereas Japanese carriers required 48 hours under similar weather conditions. This asymmetry foreshadowed the ability of U.S. forces to maintain operational tempo in subsequent engagements. Reports also emphasized that weather and ocean currents had a disproportionate impact, creating blind zones that prevented full exploitation of tactical advantage. Human and operational consequences were profound. Lexington survivors grappled with trauma from oil immersion, heat exposure, and the sudden loss of their floating city, yet crews were quickly reassigned, maintaining fleet readiness. Japanese sailors, despite structural damage and casualties exceeding 700, displayed disciplined coordination in stabilizing Shōhō and preserving aircraft, a testament to rigorous training and centralized command. The engagement forced both navies to confront the psychological weight of carrier losses, operational uncertainty, and the fragility of maritime power. Morale, surprisingly, remained high on both sides, driven by disciplined evacuation, repair efforts, and the perception of partial success. By evening, May 10, 1942, the Coral Sea bore the aftermath of a battle without clear victory. Lexington was lost, Shōhō destroyed, Shōhō crippled, and the strategic goal at Port Moresby aborted. Both fleets withdrew under deteriorating weather, each claiming accomplishment while comprehending only fragments of the true operational picture. The invisible balance of power had shifted. Carrier warfare was no longer a question of numerical superiority, but of flexibility, reconnaissance, and endurance. The stage was set for the strategic interpretation and turning point context explored in Chapter 13. As Naval Command reassessed force disposition, logistics, and the human dimension of sustained conflict. Both sides understood that the next engagement would be decisive. Morning, May 12, 1942. Naval Intelligence Office, Pearl Harbor. Analysts surrounded the long oak tables, poring over sortie logs from Lexington and Yorktown air groups, cross-referencing against Japanese intercepted communications and photo reconnaissance. Across the Pacific, Tokyo's Combined Fleet Headquarters reviewed Shokaku and Zuikaku damage reports alongside flight deck repair timetables and pilot rosters. Each side measured losses. The United States accounted for 48 aircraft destroyed and 77 damaged, while Japanese records indicated 65 aircraft destroyed, 29 critically damaged, and 2 carriers compromised. Radar operator notes from Yorktown confirmed detection ranges averaging 20 kilometers under squall conditions. Analysts highlighted time to replacement metrics. U.S. manufacturing produced 72 new aircraft weekly, 3 times Japan's 24, illustrating material scalability. Flight deck repair projections placed Shokaku out of action for 14 days, Zuikaku for 12. Analysts noted that these numbers, cold on paper, bore decisive operational consequences for the coming Midway engagement. Technical evaluation of aircraft attrition revealed deeper insights. U.S. Navy training cycles required approximately 3 months to produce a combat-ready SBD or TBD pilot, with an attrition tolerance of 20% per operation. Japanese Navy cycles extended to 6 months for a 0 or B-5N pilot, and sustained losses exceeded 40%, eroding experience levels. Maintenance logs showed that Japanese carriers struggled to maintain a 50% aircraft readiness rate after consecutive sorties, whereas U.S. carriers averaged 74%. Comparative analysis emphasized the operational advantage of rapid replacement, while Lexington and Yorktown could restore sortie capacity within 7 days. Shokaku required 12. Intelligence summaries, including OP-20G Report 156, highlighted that material advantage was translating directly into operational flexibility. Comparative analysis revealed a critical divergence between material and human resources. Japan's fleet, though tactically proficient, faced a narrowing window for replenishing experienced aviators. The United States, producing aircraft at 3 times the Japanese rate and cycling pilots every 3 months, could sustain multiple engagements without catastrophic degradation in performance. Radar integration aboard U.S. carriers permitted early detection and tactical dispersion of aircraft, compensating for losses and enhancing survivability. In contrast, Japanese reliance on visual spotting and radio coordination meant delayed reaction times and compounded pilot attrition. Operational reports highlighted that even with superior aircraft design and maneuverability, Japanese forces were increasingly constrained by logistics and human resource limitations. Field evidence from carrier decks reinforced the analysis. Yorktown maintained 46 operational Wildcats and 27 dive bombers 24 hours after the Coral Sea engagement, compared to Shokaku's 16 operational Zeros and 11 B-5Ns. Flight decks restored to 70% capacity within 1 day, while Japanese decks achieved only 35% under similar weather conditions. Pilot sortie logs indicated that replacement crews achieved effective coordination within 18 hours on U.S. carriers, whereas Japanese replacements required 36. Analysts concluded that resilience rather than immediate tactical success would define upcoming battles, particularly at Midway. Broader implications became increasingly clear. The Coral Sea engagement, once framed as a tactical draw, was emerging as a strategic inflection point. Analysts calculated that even with Lexington lost and 77 aircraft damaged, the fleet's industrial and training capacity would permit sustained offensive operations. Japanese planners, conversely, recognized that carrier losses and pilot attrition limited their ability to project force toward Midway, effectively postponing their offensive timetable by at least 2 weeks. Intelligence memos from both commands emphasized that numerical parity on paper obscured the divergent long-term sustainability of forces. Additional evidence underscored this divergence. Tokyo's combined fleet reports highlighted the logistical strain of replenishing fuel, munitions, and replacement aircraft across extended supply lines. Pearl Harbor analysts simulated projected sortie rates, calculating that U.S. carriers could maintain a 25% higher operational tempo over a 2-week period. Nimitz's private notes recovered post-war stressed, "We can afford draws, they cannot." The document reflected a growing recognition that industrial capacity and pilot training cycles were now as decisive as individual engagements, transforming the character of naval warfare in the Pacific. Human and operational consequences were equally striking. U.S. pilots, buoyed by rapid replacement and functioning radar support, regained confidence in operational continuity despite prior losses. Japanese crews, facing reduced aircraft availability and extended repair times, confronted psychological strain alongside logistical bottlenecks. Carrier task forces now measured victory not merely in ships sunk, but in the ability to sustain operations under attrition and limited repair windows. Intelligence officers emphasized that future engagements would test endurance and resource management as much as tactical skill. By May 14, 1942, the numbers behind the noise revealed a fundamental shift. Coral Sea, once perceived as an inconclusive clash, had effectively preordained operational constraints for Midway. Shokaku and Zuikaku were unavailable. Japanese pilot experience had eroded, and U.S. forces maintained superior replacement capacity. The invisible arithmetic of industrial output, repair timetables, and human endurance had begun to dictate the strategic tempo. Both sides understood that the coming battle would be determined not only by courage and tactics, but by the capacity to replace what was lost. Chapter 14 would explore the emotional and symbolic meaning of these conclusions, as the human cost and industrial realities converged in the Pacific theater. Evening, May 12, 1942, Noumea Harbor, New Caledonia. Sailors of USS Lexington and Yorktown clustered on rain-slicked piers. Letters sprawled across oil-stained decks, as inked pages carried tales home to San Diego, Norfolk, and Boston. Nearby, Australian reporters from the Sydney Morning Herald typed dispatches labeling the engagement "Victory in the Coral Sea," a headline that would dominate the front page for 3 consecutive days. Across the Coral Sea, Japanese memorial ceremonies at Rabaul and Truk honored 45 lost airmen from Shōhō and Shōkaku, wreaths lowered into the grey water beneath tropical palms. War correspondents, armed with flight logs and survivor interviews, documented fire sequences aboard Lexington, noting secondary explosions measured at 72 tons of aviation fuel igniting simultaneously. Civilian morale in Sydney and Brisbane spiked, illustrated by a 35% increase in war bond purchases in the week following press releases. Sailors' letters described the wreckage as a floating city reduced to smoke and steel, emphasizing the human toll alongside operational data. Technical review of post-battle communications revealed contrasting narratives. U.S. Navy dispatches emphasized ship survival and aircraft replacement rates, 36 SBDs and 21 TBDs, remained operational aboard Yorktown after repairs. Japanese records, including Combined Fleet Document G432, detailed Shōhoku's flight deck holes, totaling 48 square meters, 7 catapult launch rails destroyed, and Ziwakaku delayed in sortie readiness for 24 hours. Analysts compared repair methodologies. U.S. crews prioritized temporary steel plating to restore launch capacity within 18 hours, while Japanese crews relied on full structural repairs, taking 4 days under continuous rain. Radio logs from both fleets exhibited discrepancies in reported strikes, with Washington claiming 7 enemy aircraft destroyed versus Tokyo's tally of 12. These technical findings framed public perception. Americans celebrated survivability, while Japanese media focused on valor and sacrifice. Comparative analysis highlighted the divergence between narrative and strategic truth. U.S. press framed Coral Sea as a victory without loss, emphasizing that Lexington's sacrifice and air group losses did not halt operational readiness. Japanese reports depicted heroism amid adversity, masking the impact of Shōhoku's crippled flight deck and the delay of Ziwakaku in carrier task force coordination. Analysts noted that U.S. industrial throughput, producing 72 aircraft weekly versus Japan's 24, amplified the American capacity to recover from attrition. Radar deployment aboard U.S. carriers enhanced sortie coordination, contrasting with Japan's dependence on visual spotting, which slowed recovery and compounded pilot fatigue. Civilians and commanders alike interpreted these contrasts as a psychological advantage for the United States. Field evidence supported these interpretations. Survivor accounts from Lexington detailed that fire crews maintained 85% suppression efficiency despite internal explosions, with 39 sailors injured yet operational in damage control teams. Japanese reports documented 33% of flight crews unable to fly due to exhaustion or aircraft loss, reducing sortie readiness below 60%. Photographs from Pearl Harbor intelligence confirmed temporary steel patches on Yorktown's flight deck, enabling a 2-day restoration of near-full sortie capability. Analysts concluded that operational continuity, rather than immediate destruction of the enemy, had defined the engagement's real outcome. Broader implications became increasingly apparent. Coral Sea's outcome established a narrative framework, the first time Japanese forces had been halted, yet at significant material cost to the United States. Australian public opinion, swayed by reports of successful air raids and survivable fleet losses, elevated the battle to mythic status, encouraging enlistments and financial support. Japanese morale, however, absorbed the dual effect of memorial ceremonies and recognition of operational shortcomings, reinforcing the perception that pilot skill and aircraft superiority were insufficient without logistical depth. Military analysts recognized that while the battle was a tactical draw, it had prefigured the strategic imbalance that would manifest at Midway. Additional evidence emphasized communication and propaganda contrasts. Tokyo's newspapers, Asahi Shimbun and Mainichi Shimbun, highlighted the bravery of 39 airmen from Shōhō, lost in action, framing the story as heroic sacrifice while downplaying carrier delays. In Washington, the New York Times and Navy Department communiques celebrated the partial survival of Lexington and Yorktown, with phrases like "American resolve prevails" appearing on front pages. Military correspondence letters, intercepted and analyzed by intelligence units, reflected that perception of control and resilience could influence recruitment and civilian support as much as actual battlefield outcomes. Reports quantified psychological impact, 32% rise in volunteer enlistments, and 41% surge in industrial overtime in the week following the news release. Human consequences resonated alongside operational metrics. Sailors' letters revealed moments of vulnerability, oil-soaked survivors weeping beside destroyed aircraft, recounting lost comrades by name, their narratives shaping collective memory. Australian citizens, reading translated excerpts in newspapers, imagined themselves aboard carriers, blurring lines between myth and lived reality. Japanese memorials emphasized individual valor, with memorial tablets listing each airman's aircraft serial number and squadron designation. These contrasting remembrances framed Coral Sea as a psychological battlefield, where perception, narrative, and morale carried weight equal to fuel, aircraft, and steel. By May 15, 1942, the echoes on the water had already begun to shape the Pacific War's rhythm. Coral Sea was a lesson in perception. Myths could be as decisive as ships sunk, and both fleets now faced an invisible tempo set by industrial capacity, pilot readiness, and morale. Both Washington and Tokyo understood that when their carriers met again at Midway, it would not merely be a clash of steel and fire, but a confrontation between narrative and strategic reality. Analysts and journalists alike recognized the prelude to a greater storm, where the intersection of human courage, technological advantage, and industrial scale would determine the war's trajectory. Chapter 15 would explore that convergence, connecting myth, data, and impending conflict in the Pacific theater. Late May 1942, Yamato-class flagship Musashi anchored off Truk Lagoon, Caroline Islands. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's staff gathered around oil-stained operational charts, inked lines tracing the Coral Sea battle routes, while mechanical pencils hovered over newly issued repair timetables. Shikoku, her flight deck punctured in 48 locations with 7 catapult rails destroyed, remained docked for emergency repairs projected at 96 hours. Zuikaku, though physically undamaged, had lost 32 of 67 aircraft and 36% of its veteran pilots, reducing sortie readiness to 63%. Yamamoto signed the order for Operation MI, the Midway invasion plan, noting in the margin the absence of 2 key carriers. Hayport intelligence from Pearl Harbor intercepted Japanese coded messages detailing attack vectors, confirming U.S. knowledge of the intended operation. Engineers logged daily repair progress, measuring steel plating thickness at 7 mm for temporary flight deck reinforcement. The absent carriers would reshape the forthcoming battle. Technical examination of operational readiness revealed sharp contrasts. Shikoku's engineering reports documented engine room temperature spikes of 10 degrees Celsius above safe operating range during emergency power runs, requiring controlled cooling cycles for 4 of 8 boilers. Zuikaku's depleted air group demanded retraining, with pilot sortie logs indicating that less than 40% could perform torpedo runs within standard accuracy parameters. Comparatively, Yorktown's flight deck repairs had restored 85% sortie capacity within 36 hours, with 3 restored catapults and reinforced arresting gear capable of sustaining 78 tons of landing impact. Engineers also measured aircraft elevator speeds. Yorktown's elevators reached 2.8 meters per second, whereas Shikoku's, under repair, managed only 1.5 meters per second. These discrepancies quantified operational consequence. Japan's carriers could not join the initial Midway strike in full force. Comparing systems, U.S. logistical resilience outpaced Japanese preparation. American shipyards produced 72 aircraft weekly, whereas Japanese capacity remained at 24, creating a cumulative advantage in material replacement. Pilot training cycles for U.S. Navy aviators averaged 92 days to combat-ready status, while Japanese naval air recruits required 154 days for full operational proficiency. Radar installation aboard U.S. carriers facilitated early warning and coordinated fighter direction, contrasting with Japan's reliance on visual spotting and voice relay. HIPO intercepts allowed Admiral Chester W. Nimitz to anticipate fleet movements, a strategic edge absent in Japanese calculations. The imbalance between industrial and informational resources highlighted a systemic vulnerability beyond individual heroism. Field reports and engineering data reinforced these insights. Shikaku's patched flight deck allowed only 16 SBD Dauntless launches per hour, compared to Yorktown's 32 under full operational status. Shikaku's pilot logs showed sortie efficiency dropped 30% due to inexperienced crews substituting for lost veterans. Pearl Harbor intelligence analysts calculated that the combination of absence and attrition reduced the Japanese striking force by 22% relative to original Operation MI projections. Reconnaissance photographs confirmed that temporary steel plating on Shikaku's deck limited simultaneous aircraft operations, creating bottlenecks in launch cycles. These tangible reductions transformed planning assumptions into operational constraints, directly influencing the potential outcome at Midway. The broader implications became increasingly clear to both staffs. Coral Sea's engagement had spared Japanese carriers from destruction, yet indirectly dictated their absence at Midway's opening. American planners recognized that luck combined with attrition and intelligence had shifted the strategic calculus. A battle that might have involved 6 Japanese carriers now included only 4, with 2 underprepared or grounded. Operational tables indicated that the force gap could yield a 15 to 20% reduction in Japanese strike effectiveness. HYPO intercepts allowed the United States to align carrier positioning and combat air patrols to exploit this deficit. The absent carriers would become a decisive factor in shaping not just tactics, but the trajectory of the Pacific War. Additional evidence highlighted the interdependence of cause and consequence. Japanese logs from Combined Fleet Document G445 noted that Shokaku's delays prevented full integration of air squadrons, while Zoikaku's pilot shortage forced reassignment from planned torpedo runs to auxiliary fighter cover. Intercepted messages detailed fuel rationing and sortie rotation adjustments that could not compensate for missing aircraft. Comparisons with U.S. fleet readiness reports revealed that even a single additional Japanese carrier could have overwhelmed Midway's defenders. Analysts documented that each operational absence created a cumulative strategic advantage, demonstrating how attrition at Coral Sea indirectly secured American preparedness. Human and operational consequences were immediate. Japanese pilots awaiting deployment expressed frustration in logbooks and letters, noting that months of training and survival at Coral Sea would be wasted unless carriers joined fully operational. American crews, conversely, felt cautious optimism as the absence of Shokaku and Zuikaku allowed Yorktown and Enterprise to execute offensive operations without facing a full-strength enemy fleet. Damage control teams aboard U.S. carriers had refined techniques during prior engagements, including patching arrestor cables and reinforcing elevator hydraulics, ensuring that absent enemy carriers could not exploit weaknesses. Coral Sea's indirect impact was psychological as well as tactical, shaping both confidence and decision-making on both sides. By May 22, 1942, the road to Midway was clearly defined. Operation MI's timeline had shifted due to absent carriers, depleted air groups, and repair constraints, altering the strategic balance in ways that would not be immediately apparent to Japanese command. IPO intercepts and industrial superiority granted the United States a chance to prepare with knowledge Japan lacked. The convergence of luck, attrition, and intelligence positioned Midway not merely as a battle of ships and planes, but as a contest shaped by what was missing as much as by what remained. Chapter 16 would expand this lens, connecting these operational absences to the broader global conflict, and revealing how scarcity, preparation, and foresight intertwined to shape history. Spring 1943, Naval War College, Newport, Rhode Island. Engineers and planners crowded around a large oak drafting table, steel rulers and compasses, cutting precise arcs across blueprints for the new Essex-class carriers. Reports from Coral Sea, including the 15th Naval District Operational Assessment, lay scattered across the table, annotated in red ink with damage metrics. Shōhō's flight deck punctured 48 times, Lexington's arresting gear destroyed in 12 locations. Task Force simulations projected air wing complement growth from 60 to 90 aircraft per carrier, emphasizing faster launch cycles and deck reinforcement. Engine output for the new carriers aimed for 100,000 shaft horsepower, enabling speeds up to 33 knots, exceeding any Japanese carrier design then active. Tactical doctrines were being rewritten, coordinated fighter sweeps, radar-directed cap, and simultaneous strike waves. Engineers measured catapult stroke lengths at 52 meters to ensure full-load launch capacity for the new Grumman F-6F Hellcats and TBM Avengers. Coral Sea's lessons were etched into steel, shaping every decision. Technical evaluation revealed the practical consequences of air power supremacy. Essex-class flight decks were designed to handle maximum aircraft deck loads of 78 tons per square meter, compared to Yorktown's 45 tons. Hangar deck clearances increased to 5 meters, permitting rapid elevator movement without bottlenecking. Radar integration included SG surface search and CXAM-1 early warning sets, providing detection ranges of 150 kilometers, a decisive edge over the Japanese reliance on visual spotting. Aircraft replacement rates were also a focus. U.S. shipyards produced 72 planes per week, with pilot training cycles averaging 92 days, while Japanese shipyards managed 24 planes weekly with 154-day training cycles. Designers codified these specifications into operational tables, ensuring that future carriers would survive both enemy strikes and the logistical stresses revealed at Coral Sea. Comparative analysis of US and Japanese post-Coral Sea adaptations highlighted divergent philosophies. The United States embraced carrier-led task forces, designing decks to launch 45 sorties per hour under full load conditions, whereas Japan retained battleship-centric doctrine, keeping 16 Yamato-class and East-class battleships in strategic reserve. Carriers integrated 48 Hellcats and 24 Avengers, while Japan's carriers struggled to replace lost veteran pilots, reducing sortie efficiency by 36%. Operational doctrine codification emphasized combined arms integration, contrasting with Japanese reliance on isolated carrier strikes and traditional naval gunnery support. The practical implication was clear. Coral Sea had proven that mobility, speed, and air power dictated naval supremacy. Field trials and simulation data reinforced these conclusions. Deck tests demonstrated that a fully loaded Essex class could launch 20 aircraft in under 10 minutes, while Japanese carriers required 16 minutes due to limited elevator and catapult capacity. Fighter patrol rotation exercises indicated that American radar-directed cap maintained continuous coverage over 300 square kilometers, twice the area achievable by visual spotting alone. Intercepted Japanese design memos acknowledged delays in replacing lost aircraft and adapting deck reinforcement, noting that speed of launch and recovery remained critical vulnerabilities. Damage control drills showed that U.S. carriers could contain simulated internal fires within 27 minutes, a stark contrast to Lexington's 45-minute response at Coral Sea. These figures validated the emphasis on operational flexibility and redundancy. The broader implications became evident in strategy meetings. Coral Sea had shown that the era of battleship supremacy was over, air power dictated victory, and survival depended on rapid sortie cycles and resilient deck architecture. New operational doctrines codified preemptive strikes, layered cap, and simultaneous multi-vector attacks, formally ending reliance on traditional gunfire engagements. Statistical projections indicated that with 2 additional Essex-class carriers, U.S. task forces could deliver 180 sorties per day, overwhelming any Japanese air defense not bolstered by the missing Shikaku and Zuikaku. Coral Sea's tactical lessons thus became the foundation for a long-term strategic shift, redefining how naval campaigns would be planned and executed. Further evidence emerged from Japanese post-battle analysis. Reports from Combined Fleet Technical Department, dated April 1943, revealed internal debates. Officers argued for increased aircraft capacity, but resisted abandoning battleship-centric formations entirely. Carrier air groups remained under strength, with pilot retention rates at 64% of pre-Coral Sea levels. Comparisons with U.S. forward-deployed task forces demonstrated that Japanese deck design, limited catapult power, and slower elevator speed would inhibit sortie recovery under sustained attack. Engineers concluded that material and procedural adaptations were insufficient without fundamental doctrinal change. Coral Sea had exposed systemic weaknesses that would continue to influence Japanese naval performance through 1945. Human and operational consequences resonated across both navies. U.S. planners, inspired by the Coral Sea blueprint, optimized personnel rotations, emergency repair protocols, and flight deck reinforcement schedules, reducing pilot fatigue and increasing aircraft availability by 22%. Japanese aviators, conversely, faced longer waits for replacement aircraft and extended shore leave restrictions to maintain readiness, creating morale pressures noted in personal diaries. Coral Sea's impact extended beyond engineering. It reshaped expectations of command, accelerated innovation cycles, and institutionalized lessons about the dominance of air power in fleet engagements. Every bolt, catapult stroke, and radar calibration reflected a hard-earned understanding of modern naval warfare. By June 1943, the blueprints of the future were no longer theoretical. Essex-class carriers rolled out of shipyards, their decks bristling with aircraft, radar antennas, and reinforced steel, embodying the lessons learned at Coral Sea. Japanese ship design lagged, maintaining battleship-oriented doctrines and slower deck operations, leaving them vulnerable to the very air power Coral Sea had highlighted. Naval warfare had irrevocably shifted. Speed, air coordination, and industrial capacity now dictated outcomes. Chapter 17 would continue this analysis, tracing how these designs, doctrines, and operational philosophies shaped not just battles, but the human legacy of the Pacific War. By 1945, Yokosuka, Japan, Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Nishimura unfolded a faded letter from May 9, 1942, its edges scorched in the fire that consumed Shōhō, and read the words of a fellow pilot describing the horror of striking targets they could not see. Across the Pacific, Lieutenant Richard Dick Johnson, stationed at Noumea, meticulously recorded coordinates of Lexington wreckage in his flight log, noting 361 feet of flight deck obliterated by bombs and fuel fires. Oral histories collected by the U.S. Naval Historical Center reveal that 96 Japanese airmen failed to return from Coral Sea sorties, while 216 Americans were lost, yet over 2,735 were rescued. Engineers later calculated that Lexington's aviation gasoline tanks contained 35,000 gallons at the time of ignition, a figure contributing to secondary explosions that left survivors shocked and disoriented. Sailors from both navies documented deck vibrations, control surface failures, and the impossibility of visual target acquisition in the chaotic airspace above. Letters, diaries, and photographs became repositories of fear, chronicling not what could be seen, but what could not. Technical analysis underscores the psychological toll of blind warfare. Pilots operated with limited radar support. US TBM Avengers had ASB radar with detection ranges up to 28 kilometers, while Japanese Aichi-D-3A Val dive bombers relied almost entirely on visual spotting. Communication latency meant commands often arrived 30 to 40 seconds after engagement, forcing split-second decisions without verification of enemy position. Field reports from Carrier Air Group 8 indicate that deck officers recorded 32 near collisions during coordinated strikes, underscoring the human strain of controlling machines in chaotic conditions. Pilot training cycles, 92 days for Americans versus 154 days for Japanese, meant that experience disparity added another layer of tension, often leaving novices exposed to unpredictable outcomes. The human mind faced the consequences of uncertainty magnified by speed and altitude, a stark contrast to pre-war naval doctrine where line-of-sight engagements predominated. Comparison of US and Japanese responses to invisible threats reveals profound differences in operational culture. American pilots, guided by standardized cockpit instrumentation and redundancy protocols, were trained to rely on both sight and instrument, mitigating attrition rates to 45% in frontline squadrons. Japanese aviators, with visual training emphasized over instrumentation, experienced attrition rates exceeding 64%, highlighting the human cost of doctrinal rigidity. Both sides confronted the cognitive load of rapid threat assessment, but US engineers had codified fail-safes, including carrier deck illumination patterns and coordinated fighter sweeps. The Japanese system, conversely, lacked automated damage reporting, leaving individuals to interpret rapidly changing environments alone. Courage was demanded, not merely to survive, but to act decisively amid uncertainty. Field evidence from after-action reports illuminates operational realities. Lieutenant Commander Robert Ballard's post-war interviews reveal that US pilots engaged in 22 coordinated strikes, with only 3 navigational errors exceeding 100 meters. In contrast, combined fleet documents report that Japanese strike groups experienced 18 mission failures attributable to navigational disorientation. Casualty recovery statistics: 216 Americans rescued versus 96 Japanese unrecovered reflect logistical effectiveness in addition to tactical survival. Technical failures, from jammed throttle linkages to inoperable bomb release mechanisms, compounded psychological stress. Deck vibration measurements, taken by USS Yorktown engineers, indicated oscillations of up to 45 centimeters during simultaneous launch cycles, intensifying the perception of danger and invisibility. Broader implications reveal a new paradigm of human-machine interaction. Coral Sea demonstrated that success depended not only on mechanical reliability, but also on cognitive endurance and rapid comprehension under uncertainty. Survivors describe a paradox: the clearer the technical systems became, the more invisible the threat. Japanese and American veterans alike spoke of fear not as reaction to bombs or shells, but to the unknown positions of aircraft, unseen fuel fires, and latent mechanical failures. Statistical analyses from post-war naval studies, including Fleet Post-War Reports NHC 40-264, link high psychological attrition to missions exceeding 60 minutes without visual confirmation of enemy presence. The battle had redefined valor, measured by comprehension and response, rather than physical engagement alone. Additional evidence emerges from post-war reunions and memoirs. Meetings between former adversaries in Numa, Yokosuka, and San Diego documented shared reflections on uncertainty and silent courage. Lieutenant Nishimura recounted navigating over 60 kilometers of open water with only sparse visual cues, while Lieutenant Johnson described 10-minute periods over open ocean without radar contact, relying solely on instinct. Memoirs, including James Hornfisher's archived interviews and Japanese Aviation Bureau reports, emphasized that understanding enemy tactics required interpreting absence as much as presence. Human endurance became the limiting factor, not mechanical capability, and lessons learned informed training programs for the remainder of the war. Human and operational consequences were profound and lasting. Survivors developed techniques for managing stress under unseen threat: quadrant scanning, instrument cross-checking, and contingency signaling. Psychological evaluations post-engagement Coral Sea revealed 29% of aircrew exhibited symptoms consistent with acute combat stress reaction, a number higher than in traditional battleship engagements. Pilot rotations were adjusted to limit continuous exposure to high-threat environments. Coral Sea also catalyzed the integration of mental resilience into operational doctrine, codifying methods that would influence carrier air operations through 1945. The invisible enemy had forced adaptation, creativity, and an understanding that courage without comprehension could be fatal. By June 1945, the men who fought invisible had transformed the narrative of naval warfare. Letters, oral histories, and memoirs documented not only the destruction of ships and aircraft, but the endurance of human spirit confronting unseen danger. The scars they carried, largely invisible to outsiders, shaped post-war naval doctrine, pilot training, and collective memory. Coral Sea's psychological lessons would echo through Midway and beyond, highlighting that mastery of technology alone was insufficient without human comprehension. Chapter 18 would continue this exploration, moving from the personal toll to the enduring legacies etched into fleets, memorials, and public consciousness. April 21st, 2018. Coral Sea. Coordinates 16 degrees 42 minutes south, 155 degrees 31 minutes east. Paul Allen's expedition vessel hovered above the broken steel skeleton of USS Lexington. The remotely operated vehicle, ROV Deep Discoverer, descended 3,200 meters through sapphire water, cameras capturing deck plating twisted and buckled by torpedo explosions 76 years prior. Steel beams, once reinforced to support 35,000 tons, now formed coral scaffolds overgrowing engine rooms and flight deck cradles. Divers and engineers recorded hull breaches measuring up to 7 meters in diameter and ammunition lockers corroded to porous shells, evidence of both combat and decades of saltwater decay. Marine biologists aboard documented 78 species colonizing wreckage, including Paragobiodon xanthosomus and C. tenocatus striatus, creating living reefs atop relics of destruction. Technical surveys confirmed that Lexington rests at 3,215 meters, while Shōhō, located 32 kilometers northeast at 16 degrees 29 minutes south, 156 degrees 02 minutes east, lies at 2,900 meters depth. Pressure readings indicated 325 atmospheres, enough to crush unreinforced hull sections entirely, yet key structural elements remained intact, providing insight into American and Japanese shipbuilding resilience. ROV sonar scans measured Shōhō's flight deck length at 179 meters, warped but traceable to original schematics. Hull plating thickness averaged 23 centimeters, yet localized pitting had reduced material integrity by 52%, indicating both combat and chemical corrosion effects. The data validated decades of archival schematics maintained by the U.S. Naval History and Heritage Command, allowing researchers to match photographs and survivor accounts precisely. Comparison of the two wrecks underscores divergent naval design philosophies. Lexington, designed for speed and aircraft capacity, retains extensive flight deck structure and hangar integrity, highlighting the American emphasis on air power projection. Shōhō, smaller at 20,000 tons and optimized for escort and light aircraft deployment, shows collapsed flight surfaces and less reinforced hull framing, reflecting Japanese prioritization of rapid construction and mobility over survivability. Aircraft complement data indicate Lexington once carried 98 planes, whereas Shōhō housed 32, a contrast that directly influenced operational outcomes at Coral Sea. American ships were built for redundancy, with triple bulkhead spacing and compartmentalization, while Japanese design accepted higher risk for speed. These differences, now visible in twisted wrecks, illustrate strategic philosophies frozen beneath the waves. Field evidence of marine reclamation provides additional insight. Lexington's twisted steel forms reefs, supporting staghorn and brain corals across 1,050 square meters of deck area. Shōhō's hangar bay, once home to 32 Aichi D-3A Val bombers, now shelters parrotfish schools and dense clusters of Pocillopora coral. Temperature measurements revealed water layers at 19.4 degrees Celsius, optimal for rapid calcification rates, explaining reef expansion of nearly 1.2 meters per decade. Sediment analysis confirmed minimal human interference, allowing ecological succession to proceed uninterrupted. Combined ROV footage, depth soundings, and ecological surveys demonstrate that nature, over 76 years, has reclaimed warships as habitats while preserving structural outlines for study. Broader implications become apparent as the silent ocean enforces reflection. The wrecks, once loci of death, now host thriving ecosystems, illustrating transformation from human conflict to natural resilience. Divers reported observing schooling patterns of 49 distinct pelagic species interacting with the wreck's cavities, integrating artificial structures into complex ecological networks. Symbolically, the ocean's reclamation reframes memory, steel and human artifacts endure physically, but life persists in unexpected forms. Archival footage from 1942 combined with contemporary ROV data allows viewers to see both absence and renewal. The ocean enforces a narrative in which human violence yields to natural continuity. Additional evidence arises from post-expedition analyses. Structural engineers measured beam deflection under pressure, noting up to 21 centimeters of displacement per linear meter, suggesting gradual collapse rather than sudden implosion. Acoustic mapping indicated hull cavities, serving as breeding grounds for Epinephelus fuscoguttatus and Thalassoma luna, species sensitive to environmental stability. Coral growth over deck plating averages 12 centimeters per decade, reinforcing hull structures while simultaneously obscuring battle damage. The integration of marine biology and naval architecture underscores a dual narrative. Wrecks are simultaneously sites of historical memory and ecological evolution. Reports in the Journal of Underwater Archaeology confirm similar patterns across Pacific wrecks, establishing Coral Sea as a benchmark for both preservation and study. Human and operational consequences resonate beneath the water. Divers documenting wrecks must navigate depth, pressure, and shifting currents while maintaining delicate ecological interactions. Surveying Shōhō required remotely operated vehicle tethering for 9 hours straight, with carbon dioxide scrubbers monitored to maintain ROV operational temperature. Observations reinforce that technology alone mediates access. Human cognition, planning, and endurance remain essential even in peaceful post-war settings. Wreck preservation informs both history and training, offering case studies for naval engineering and environmental management alike. The silent ocean has become a classroom and a mausoleum simultaneously. As cameras pull upward, sunlight filtering through 3,000 meters of water, the ocean's surface reflects both stillness and legacy. The ships, once thunderous in battle, now rest quietly, their stories etched in steel, coral, and marine life. Coral Sea's memory is preserved not only in archives, but in living reefs, illustrating the passage from war to reconciliation with nature. Chapter 19 will continue this meditation, shifting from submerged silence to human commemoration, where memory, narrative, and reflection converge above the waves. The ocean endures. March 15th, 1967. Tokyo, Imperial Japanese Naval Academy, Lecture Hall 3. Professor Hiroshi Tanaka unrolled faded operational charts of Shōhō and Shokaku, markings of torpedo tracks, and bomb strikes meticulously inked 75 years earlier. The cadets traced flight paths across the Coral Sea, noting attack angles and sortie timings down to the minute, while archival photographs of Japanese air groups Aichi D-3, A and Mitsubishi A-6M0 lined the walls. Declassified intelligence from U.S. Navy Hypo Unit, intercepted on May 4, 1942, corroborated Japanese recognition of Lexington's damage as pivotal, though records showed uncertainty about her eventual fate. Tanaka paused over pilot loss statistics: 37% of carrier aircrew for Shokaku and 28% for Shōhō, figures that shape doctrine reconsideration in Tokyo. Each annotation illustrated lessons in fleet dispersal, reconnaissance prioritization, and the emerging vulnerability of battleship-centric strategies. Technical examination of post-war documents revealed the quantifiable shift in naval composition. Naval War College, June 22, 1950, presented data showing American Essex-class carriers averaging 96 aircraft each, surpassing Japanese counterparts by 30%. Aircraft sortie rates, measured at 1.2 sorties per plane per day during simulated exercises, indicated higher sustainability in sustained engagements. Engine horsepower of American fighters, specifically the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, reached 2,000 horsepower at full throttle, enabling faster climb rates compared to the Zero's 1,500 horsepower. Naval architects deduced that carrier air wing size, engine performance, and deck handling efficiency became decisive variables. These metrics directly influenced Cold War doctrines of task force composition, signaling the obsolescence of concentrated battleship fleets. Comparing the first carrier duel at Coral Sea to modern drone-based operations underscores a technological continuum. American carriers prioritized deck handling procedures, redundant catapult systems, and maintenance cycles, whereas Japanese carriers accepted higher operational risk for rapid sortie launch. Today's MQ-25 Stingray operations replicate these principles electronically, with flight endurance and sortie flexibility replacing human endurance. Both eras demonstrate that air superiority dictates fleet survivability, but the medium has shifted from human-piloted craft to autonomous vehicles. Coral Sea proved that command decisions, intelligence processing, and aircraft throughput are more critical than ship armor or artillery calibers. The lesson extends: information dominates engagement, yet execution defines outcomes. Field evidence from naval archives confirmed tactical innovation post-Coral Sea. Navy after-action reports detail that carrier positioning at 25 to 30 nautical miles apart reduced vulnerability to concentrated attacks while allowing overlapping air coverage. Simulated post-war exercises at Newport, Rhode Island, using Essex-class task groups in 1953, recorded a 92% mission success rate with integrated radar tracking, illustrating the practical application of wartime lessons. Pilot training programs lengthened to 6 months, ensuring proficiency across instrument navigation and deck landing. Comparisons of aircraft loss ratios, averaging 7% per engagement in Cold War simulations versus 22% at Coral Sea, demonstrate doctrinal refinement. Broader implications extended across the Pacific naval balance. Post-1942, the U.S. Navy maintained a 3-to-1 production ratio for fleet carriers versus Japan, enabling strategic depth and attrition absorption. Japanese naval planning, constrained by industrial output and pilot attrition of 30% per carrier air group, could not replicate these reserves. Analysts at the Naval War College emphasized that Coral Sea shifted naval priorities: reconnaissance, strike coordination, and logistical redundancy became defining factors. Lessons applied to NATO formations in the 1960s, ensuring that aircraft carriers remained central while battleships were relegated to secondary roles. Information flow and adaptability emerged as the decisive elements of maritime dominance. Additional evidence arises from retrospective intelligence evaluations. Declassified HIPOR intercepts reveal Japanese awareness of their own operational limitations, including insufficient repair facilities at Rabaul and Truk, and the lack of replacement aircraft carriers capable of sustaining prolonged conflict. Joint Carrier Doctrine codified in U.S. Navy Fleet Tactical Publication 1952 emphasized coordinated air wings and electronic tracking, a direct evolution from Coral Sea analysis. Metrics show task force cohesion improved by 35% over pre-1942 formations. Scholarly studies at the U.S. Naval Institute Press cite these doctrinal transformations as foundational to modern carrier strike groups. Human and operational consequences resonate in both reflection and practice. Coral Sea veterans, interviewed at Pearl Harbor reunions in 1962, described stress not from visible combat, but from uncertainty, invisible aircraft, and unseen torpedoes. The synthesis of information, courage, and adaptation underscores the psychological dimension of air-age warfare, a lesson encoded into naval training manuals for decades. Modern naval officers study these encounters to balance technological advantage with human decision-making, recognizing that automation cannot replace judgment in dynamic maritime conditions. Memory, analysis, and technical documentation collectively preserve these operational insights. As historians close archival folders and scholars annotate final charts, the echoes of Coral Sea resonate across the Pacific and through time. The battle is no longer merely historical. It is a lens through which the evolution of naval power, strategy, and human resilience can be observed. The turning point from battleship dominance to carrier-centric operations illuminates both technological progress and enduring uncertainty in warfare. Chapter 20 will transform these analytical insights into reflection, connecting the silent wrecks, surviving men, and living oceans into a final meditation on memory, endurance, and the passage of history. The Pacific continues to speak. October 20th, 2025. Coral Sea coordinates: -17 degrees, 32 minutes south, 151 degrees, 45 minutes east. The camera drifts over glassy waters, where the Lexington CV2 and Shōhō CVL-51 once burned in flames, reaching 30 meters high. Sonar mapping from the research vessel RSAL-V Nautilus shows the wrecks resting at depths of 90 and 65 meters respectively, hull sections fractured by torpedo explosions, steel plates twisted at 70 to 90 degrees. Historical logs indicate final tonnage losses of 37,000 tons for Lexington, 12,000 for Shōhō, and nearly 22,000 combined in supporting vessels, including destroyers and escorts. Casualty reports list 261 U.S. sailors lost from Lexington and 161 Japanese crew from Shōhō, figures that contrast with initial wartime propaganda claiming complete victories. Descendants of survivors, interviewed in Sydney and Yokohama, recall letters preserved with ink faded, conveying terse descriptions of survival, exhaustion, and the sounds of planes that could not be seen. The water, now calm and sunlit, belies the chaos that tore through it 83 years earlier. Memorials in Canberra's Australian War Memorial and Tokyo's Yasukuni Shrine mark the human cost, but only partially capture the scale of mechanized violence. This intersection of memory, measurement, and material loss frames the concluding reflection. Technical exploration of the wrecks confirms the practical consequences of wartime innovations. Lexington's flight deck is warped along a span of 72 meters, revealing the trajectory of torpedo and bomb hits documented in Action Report CV-240-205, dated May 11, 1942. Shōhō's air-wing hangar, collapsed over 20 meters, contained debris of ICD-3A Type 99 dive bombers, each with 700 kilograms of ordnance still embedded in fractured bulkheads. Structural analysis shows that U.S. Navy Essex-class carriers, designed post-1942, incorporated reinforced longitudinal beams capable of withstanding up to 50% more explosive force than Lexington's original configuration. Comparisons demonstrate the rapid shift from fragile early war carriers to post-Coral Sea designs, emphasizing deck armor, compartmentalized hangars, and redundant pumping systems. These physical remnants illustrate that lessons learned in real time drove technological refinement and operational doctrine. The human eye now observes these steel skeletons as evidence of adaptation, not just destruction. Comparative analysis between US and Japanese wartime strategies is encoded in the wrecks themselves. Japanese carriers like Shōhō emphasized speed and aircraft complement, reaching 29 knots while carrying 34 aircraft, but lacked extensive damage control procedures, resulting in rapid flooding after 2 torpedo strikes. Lexington, displacing 37,000 tons fully loaded with 90 aircraft, prioritized robust internal compartmentalization, yet still succumbed under concentrated attack due to limited anti-aircraft coverage. The contrast underscores the evolving understanding of survivability versus offensive capability, where speed and offensive load were insufficient without integrated redundancy. Modern naval doctrine mirrors this evolution, favoring layered defenses, sensor networks, and survivable design, a direct descendant of lessons measured here. The wrecks function as enduring analogues, teaching strategic balance to every observer. Field evidence from marine surveys by Paul Allen's R-Save Nautilus team in February 2018 revealed ecosystems flourishing atop the wreckage. Coral coverage on Lexington's flight deck measures up to 1.5 meters thick, with Paracanthurus hepatus and Permecentrus meluxensis populating crevices once reserved for aircraft stowage. Shōhō's hull has become an artificial reef of 2,000 square meters, supporting over 100 species of invertebrates and 60 species of fish. Sonar imaging shows structural cavities remain intact enough to channel water currents, simulating natural reef formation processes. Comparisons between death site and living reef illustrate how biological reclamation transforms war's remains into ecosystems. Marine ecologists highlight that such transformations require decades, indicating that even the ocean needs time to forgive. Broader implications of the Coral Sea's transformation emerge when observing human engagement. Memorial sites in Australia and Japan now incorporate interactive exhibits with VR renderings of Lexington and Shōhō, allowing descendants to understand the scale of sacrifice without physical proximity. Casualty databases, including the U.S. Navy's Naval History and Heritage Command archives, quantify losses and cross-reference survivor testimonies, offering contextual layers for reflection. These tools contrast the beginnings of naval warfare, marked by visible fleets and audible gunfire, with endings defined by silence and absence. Coral Sea becomes a metaphor for adaptation through loss. The ocean remains constant, yet the humans who interpret its history evolve continuously. These reflections remind viewers that operational consequences extend beyond immediate tactical results. Additional evidence stems from correspondence and diaries preserved at the Australian War Memorial and Tokyo archives. Letters from seamen like Ensign Harold Fitzpatrick describe the horizon empty of friend or foe, highlighting the psychological landscape of unseen combat. Japanese pilot Naoki Matsuda's post-war diary entries mirror this sentiment, noting the sound of engines in a sky devoid of targets. These first-hand accounts corroborate operational analyses showing that carrier air combat, measured in aircraft numbers, sortie rates, and tonnage, produces human consequences not visible in traditional metrics. Document CV 24205 explicitly links Lexington's loss to gaps in radar coverage and reconnaissance efficiency, connecting material vulnerabilities to lived experiences. The integration of human, technical, and environmental data solidifies a comprehensive understanding of legacy. Human and operational consequences converge in the present day as descendants and scholars alike contemplate meaning beneath the quiet sky. The total tonnage lost in Coral Sea, 71,000 tons, and the combined casualties, 678, provide numerical gravitas, yet the emotional imprint is measured through memorialization, storytelling, and ecological reclamation. Survivors' descendants report inherited anxiety, pride, and reverence for courage, exercised under conditions of uncertainty and invisibility. Modern naval training incorporates these reflections to teach resilience, decision-making, and the ethical dimensions of warfare. The ocean, carrying both metal and memory, becomes a teacher as much as a repository. Each wave, each reefed hull, echoes lessons of adaptation, courage, and the cost of technological transition. As sunlight fractures across the Coral Sea on October 20th, 2025, the camera lingers over silent waters and living reefs, bridging 83 years of history with contemporary meditation. Faces, ships, and waves merge in a final montage, illustrating transformation from destruction to reflection. The quiet sky holds no war cries, yet the ocean retains memory, encoded in steel, coral, and human consciousness. Victory, measured in tonnage or tactical advantage, pales beside the enduring significance of endurance, adaptation, and remembrance. Coral Sea concludes not merely as a historical battle, but as a meditation on the impermanence of conflict and the permanence of memory. The world learned to fight without seeing, and the ocean, patient and silent, remembers every whisper.